Good morning, everyone. Oh, great. We have Commissioner John Sixon. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our budget work session number 5. Audience members, I want to start by asking you to please silence your electronic devices. Commissioner Singleton is attending virtually. For those presenting today, please turn your mic on when you begin speaking so the red light is showing, green light is showing, and off when you've completed your remarks so that the red light is showing. We think we fixed the issues with the mics that we were having yesterday, but we will make sure that everyone can be heard. And for all presenters, don't forget to state your name for the record before speaking or responding to questions. Today's budget work session is from our Homeless Services Department, so I want to invite them to come on up and begin the presentation. All right, and good morning, Director Field. Are you kicking us off this morning? Okay, excellent.
Good. Thank you. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Dan Field. I'm the Director of the Homeless Services Department from Multnomah County. Really pleased to be here this morning with all of you. We've got a good presentation. It's a long one. I was just conferring with the Chair. We will break partway through so that you have time to discuss. We may not get through our whole presentation today, so rather than racing through it, we'll find a natural breaking spot about halfway through the work session, and we'll use that to transition to a discussion. My name is Dan Field. I use he, him pronouns. I think I did that, and I'm going to let my colleagues introduce themselves right now, and then we'll come back when they present, but let's just do quick introductions now, please.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Emily Nelson. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the Equity Manager at the Homeless Services Department.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Antoinette Payne. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Finance Manager Senior for the department.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Anna Plum. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Homeless Services Department.
And good morning. My name is Nikki Dardinger. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the Chair of the Community Budget Advisory Committee for the Homeless Services Department.
And Nikki, thank you for being here. We're going to turn the mic over to you in just a minute. I'm going to make some opening comments. I did a dry run last night, and it came out right at about 18 and a half minutes. So I'm going to talk really fast. No, I'm going to forego any kind of extended opening comments. We need to get into the meat of the matter here, and I know that we want to start in on the budget. And I'm really pleased to let my colleagues here take front and center on the budget. They've done a lot of hard work to get us here today, as they do throughout the year, and it's an honor to sit alongside them as they present. I do want to give maybe just 3 frame-setting talking points for all of you, not so much for the hearing, but for the work session that you will do in the days and weeks ahead. So 3 quick things that I think really summarize my approach to this work, and I encourage all of us to consider the frame we're going to bring to this. Number 1, I think even though we're dealing with a single fiscal year, we have to consider the long term. We all aspire for any given individual in Multnomah County that their experience with homelessness is rare and brief. But sadly, as a community, we have a deep and persistent and what seems to be intractable shortage of affordable housing across many income levels, not just our lowest income levels. And we know that homelessness is likely to exist in some form in our community for many years. And as a result, as we do this work on FY26, I think the decisions we make in the coming week must be aimed at building and maintaining a system of services that is durable, resilient, effective, and not subject to change with every fiscal year or election cycle. Secondly, we really aimed, Emily will talk more about this, to create a balanced system, and I encourage you to do the same. We need services for people at every stage of homelessness. A balanced system includes funding and services to prevent homelessness, to stabilize people, to shelter people when needed, to serve them during their journey and to help them exit homelessness into housing. A one-size-fits-all system will never work for everyone, and an incomplete system won't serve anyone. For example, at last week's Homeless Response System Strategy meeting, Commissioner Singleton, the chair, several mayors, we heard loud and clear from 3 of our largest nonprofit leaders who operate our emergency shelters for the city and the county. They reminded us in no uncertain terms that shelter without services and without housing placement simply does not work. So that leads us to create a balanced system across all of our resources. And then the final pitch I'll make before I turn it over to Nikki and then ultimately the team is I would encourage you to trust those that work for you. Working in homeless services is challenging and complex, and as elected leaders, I'm guessing that the 5 of you at times feels like it's sitting in your lap for you to solve. And in some respects it is, but you have a big supporting cast. And we know that you have a lot on your plates beyond the work that we bring to you today. And Multnomah County is blessed to have deep expertise in the Homeless Services Department and people in other county departments joining us in this work. Our staff, both here and in the department at large, collectively has hundreds of years of experience serving individuals, leading teams, managing financial transactions, analyzing the data, evaluating best practices, supporting our provider partners, and much more. They're here to serve as a resource for the 5 of you, and by extension for everyone in Multnomah County. And I encourage you to draw on every ounce of your skill and expertise in the coming days as you make decisions that will impact the most vulnerable in our community. If we can go to slide 3. There we are. Pleased to introduce Nikki Dardinger, who is chair of our Community Budget Advisory Committee.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan, and thank you everyone for the space this morning. My name is Nikki Dardinger. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm really pleased to be here. Our committee worked really hard on our supplemental letter, and I'm really proud of the work that we did. So I'll be reading that letter for y'all this morning. So on behalf of the Community Budget Advisory Committee for the Homeless Services Department, thank you for your thoughtful consideration of our committee's feedback on the department's budget and this year's budget process. Just a little bit about our committee. We are a 9-person committee. We have diverse members who include people with experience with homelessness, people from communities of color, people who work for nonprofit organizations that provide services to people who are unhoused, and people who care very deeply about our unhoused neighbors in Portland and in Multnomah County. So the committee has reviewed the department's program offers and the chair's proposed budget for next year, and we want to highlight some recommendations and areas of concern. So we can go to the next slide. The first recommendation relates to culturally specific services and equitable outcomes. We want to emphasize the continued need to fully and robustly fund and provide technical assistance to organizations that are providing culturally specific services. We know that culturally specific services work and are more effective at supporting individuals from communities that have been historically under-resourced. These include communities of color, the LGBTQIA2S+ community, veterans, and people with disabilities, including those with mental health and substance use disorders. We urge the county to dedicate any additional funding that is received to support culturally specific service providers, including providing technical assistance and capacity building resources. We also urge the Homeless Services Department to ensure that our non-culturally specific service providers are relentlessly striving to achieve their established equity metrics. Our next area that we want to highlight relates to the lack of new permanent supportive housing units. While we commend the county for continuing to support existing permanent supportive housing units, we are concerned and disappointed about the lack of funding for new PSH units next fiscal year. Our community has a deep need for additional permanent supportive housing. There are people living unhoused in our community who require PSH to successfully transition from living on the streets to being housed. They require the supportive services and continual rental assistance that accompany permanent supportive housing units. As a community, we have recognized this need, as evidenced by the establishment of the goal of adding 2,235 new PSH housing units by 2030 in our SHS local implementation plan. So if additional funding becomes available, we strongly encourage and urge the county to dedicate funding to the addition of new PSH units in the coming year. The third area or recommendation relates to placement out of shelter. So I do want to name that there is truly earnest disagreement within our committee regarding the balance of resources for increased shelter beds versus placement out of shelter. However, we do all agree that our community's long-term strategy should emphasize permanent housing. That being said, we acknowledge the continued need for shelter beds in our region, and we want to strongly recommend the continued provision of safe, trauma-informed shelter environments that have a defined pathway to permanent housing. Shelter is only one part of the system for addressing homelessness, and it is never the end result that we are striving for. Shelter is indeed shelter, but it is not housing, and it is not the same as being permanently housed. It is temporary. It is not accessible by all of our neighbors. For instance, partnered individuals, people with pets, people with mental health and substance use disorders, transgender and gender expansive individuals, people with children, people with disabilities, they all experience barriers to accessing shelter in our community. Shelter isn't an appropriate option for all of our neighbors, as not everyone feels safe or receives the services and care that they need in a shelter environment, and shelter doesn't align with our community's overarching goals of housing for everyone. While the county has prioritized adding new shelter beds, these new beds aren't the only strategy to ensure that there are enough beds for the people who need and want them. Another strategy is to invest in the successful transition of people from shelter into permanent housing. As an example, this can include robust funding for employment services. Every time a person transitions from a shelter bed into housing, it frees up a bed for another person who needs it. We strongly urge the county to place less emphasis on adding new shelter beds, which quite frankly feels like more of a political strategy and not a human-centered strategy, and instead dedicate resources to the placement of individuals into permanent housing. Our next area relates to wage equity and staff training. So as we all know, the Homeless Services Department is not a direct service provider themselves, and instead issues contracts to numerous community-based service providers to implement the department's and the county's goals. It is vital that the Homeless Services Department and the county prioritize ensuring that the employees of contracted service providers are paid a living wage for this work and receive the comprehensive training and support that they need to provide high-quality services. Not only is this the right thing to do, we should absolutely be paying people a living wage, but also it leads to better outcomes for people who are unhoused and accessing services. When staff turnover decreases, when staff vacancies are minimal, service providers provide better care. It means that relationships between clients and case managers aren't disrupted when a case manager moves to a new organization. It means that service providers can maintain a full caseload of clients, and it means that more people remain housed. We urge the county to require service providers to pay a living wage, which means that county contracts need to fund service providers at a rate that allows them to pay their employees a living wage. And additionally, if funds become available, we encourage the county to add back the third year of workforce stabilization grants, which for many service providers resulted in less turnover, less vacancies, and improved staff well-being. Next slide, please. Just some final thoughts on the budget and the budget process. So one of my fellow committee members recently stated, the county's budget should be a tool for justice and not merely survival. As we make the hard decisions regarding which programs to save and which to deprioritize or eliminate, we need to remember that this isn't about saving programs, it's about saving lives. Additionally, we want to offer that the historic and current politicalization of the Homeless Service Department is a barrier to doing the actual work of eliminating homelessness in our community. The political posturing isn't honest, and it isn't helpful to helping our community understand the actual work of supporting our unhoused neighbors. Our community service providers are experts in their work, and our unhoused neighbors are the experts of their own lives and know what they need. Our service providers are working directly with individuals who are unhoused, listening to what they need and how best to meet those needs. We encourage our elected officials to spend time with service providers, with our unhoused neighbors, and with advisory bodies, including the CBACs, to inform your understanding of community needs and the best practices that work. We did just want to offer a note on the process this year. This year's process was hard for us, and our CBAC was disappointed with the process itself. Our committee is composed, like all CBACs, of unpaid volunteers who are contributing our time, our expertise, our experience to evaluating the Homeless Service Department budget and providing recommendations that reflect our desire for a budget that prioritizes equity, justice, and community thriving. The expectations that our committee could thoughtfully and intentionally complete this work in a 3-week time period were unrealistic and suggest that county leadership considers our feedback perfunctory at best. And it did not help that there were multiple mistakes in the uploading of budget information that made it impossible for our committee to understand and evaluate the proposed budget. We encourage the Homeless Service Department and the county more broadly to provide a minimum of 8 weeks to CBACs to do their work and to be very clear about how their recommendations will be used. Additionally, the county needs to prioritize the release of accurate information to the public. We understand that mistakes happen. However, it took 2 weeks to correct the errors in the budget information that was provided to the public, which is the only information that CBACs have access to, which reduced our committee's time to only 1 week of access to accurate budget information prior to the original deadline to submit our recommendation letter. This was completely unacceptable, and the county needs to prioritize identifying the systemic issues that caused this error and ensure that it is fixed prior to the next budget cycle. So I don't want to close without acknowledging some really amazing people who helped us throughout the whole process here. So we really want to extend our gratitude to Homeless Services Department staff who have supported our work. Enormous thanks to Bill Boyd, who I know is behind me, for his commitment to supporting our committee and addressing all of our questions and information needs. To Malka Geffen for capturing all of our meeting minutes and attending so many of our meetings. Lori Kelly for also attending so many meetings with us and helping us understand program evaluation metrics and the department's programs. Emily Nelson, who is sitting up here with us, for training us on the racial equity lens tool and being available to answer our questions, particularly as they relate to equity and to equity metrics. Antoinette Payne, thank you, friend, for reviewing the budgets with us, both from the Homeless Services Department and the chair, and answering so many of our questions. We also want to thank Kanoy Eggleston, Dan Field, Brianna Flores, Crystal Otero from the Homeless Services Department, Sarah Ryan from the chair's office, and Jillian Schoen and Robin Johnson from the Homeless Response System for attending one of our committee meetings and providing information and answering all of our questions. So thank you all so much for this time today, and we really appreciate having this space to chat with you. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I know this group of humans has a wonderful presentation for you.
Thank you so much, Nikki. We appreciate the work that you and all of the CBAC board did.
Nikki, Nikki Dardinger. I want to say your name correctly. They even gave it to me phonetically, and I still mispronounced
That's
it.
okay.
So wanted to get that right. And I wanted to publicly thank you and the entire CBAC for your service. We accept, on behalf of the department, we accept your input. The constructive input and even input that's challenging for us, we absolutely accept that. I want to acknowledge also for you and the fellow committee members, it has been a bumpy couple of years, I think, across many county departments. We're still refining this process. It was much better this year than last year, and next year will continue to improve, and I hope we'll see you here for that. So I want to thank you for that and for the really thoughtful comments that your committee brought to us.
Great, thank you.
Gonna go, yeah, so.
I was just wondering, and this is a little bit broader than the scope you were asked specifically, but I assume it may have come up in conversations. What did the conversations in the CBAC say related to how the county should respond to the changing priorities of some of our partners? I think I'm kind of struggling with what the balance is if one partner or two partners or other partners are, and I'll be specific, the city of Portland is very shelter forward, which is fine, but did that influence the conversation about how the county should respond?
I'm going to say no, or at least not very much. I think our committee was very focused on the county's budget particularly, and the Homeless Services Department in particular. And so we did not spend a lot of time. It certainly came up occasionally in conversation, but we did not spend a lot of time thinking about our partners like the city of Portland. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Once again, for the record, my name is Emily Nelson. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the Equity Manager at the Joint Office of Homeless Services. Can we go to the next slide? Oops, I'm also going to be the Equity Manager of the Homeless Services Department starting July 1. I knew I was going to do that. Sorry. So I'm very happy to be starting us by grounding us in our department's mission and values, which are included on this slide, and are in service to our vision of an equitable community in which all people have safe, affordable, and accessible housing. Next slide, please. Our guiding principles, as stated in our mission, reflect the framework for the work we do, as well as the decisions we make in processes such as the budget recommendations. Some high-level examples of how we operationalize these include our use of the Racial Equity Lens tool, which I'll be talking about in a couple slides in more detail, as well as our 5 advisory bodies who provide guidance and recommendations on the work of the Homeless Services Department, and include our Continuum of Care Board, the SHS Advisory Committee, and our CBAC, who you just heard from, and I want to thank them for their thoughtful recommendations this morning, as well as our Lived Experience Advisory Committee and our Equity Advisory Committee. I'd like to highlight those last two as the two committees who were not mandated by a funding source, but were convened at by the director's office, knowing that lived experience and equity are the expertise that we want driving the work of our department. We have also made quality an increased focus in our work, and this has resulted in a range of improvements, including significant improvements to our contracting and reimbursement practices, as noted in a recent auditor's report. And finally, we focus on coordination, both at the system level in the coordination of services across our continuum, and here at the county with our extensive cross-departmental coordination, particularly around SHS dollars. Next slide, please. So it's worth noting that fiscal year 26 represents the first year since the inception of SHS that the Homeless Services Department is facing a constraint rather than a growth fiscal landscape. It was important to us to preserve critical elements of our system of care that we've been building on in recent years. These next few slides are going to go through the strategies and tools we use to make our budget decisions, and the important context to those decisions were our overarching goals of keeping people housed, sustaining and adding shelter units in alignment with our community sheltering strategy, and prioritizing housing placement. We also wanted to prioritize both the services and priority populations identified in the HRAP and the LIP, which Anna is going to talk more about shortly, and with particular prioritization of supportive housing. Next slide, please. Program offers were evaluated based on a set of criteria, which was then used to inform reductions. We also considered the use of one-time only dollars. The criteria considered a variety of factors, including plan alignment, whether the services were based on evidence-based practices and had demonstrated outcomes, and multiple equity-driven factors, which I'll describe in more detail on the next slide right now. Next slide, please. Equity is a core value of Multnomah County and of the Homeless Services Department. We also know that communities of color and other marginalized communities experience persistent disparities in the experience of homelessness and homeless services, and that structural and systemic racism and other forms of oppression cause homelessness for communities who experience them. This means that in order to meaningfully serve the people experiencing homelessness in our county, we have a responsibility to address and eliminate and work towards the elimination of racial and other disparities through equitable service delivery. This means supporting the culturally responsive and culturally specific capacity of our system of services and applying an equity lens to our work and decision making. The Homeless Services Department developed our Racial Equity Lens, or what we call our RELT, in 2022. Informed by the Multnomah County Equity and Empowerment Lens, as well as other best practices, this tool was designed to help us apply an equity lens to the specific work of the Homeless Services Department. Fiscal year 26 is the third year we have asked program offer authors to complete a RELT for each program offer. This includes reviewing the previous year's RELTs to identify challenges and opportunities and understand how these will impact the analysis of this year's program offers. The RELTs are reviewed alongside the program offers by the equity manager and the executive team. Additionally, for fiscal year 26, our finance leadership, in partnership with the equity manager, created a prioritization tool to inform decisions about impacts of proposed cuts in a constrained budget. This tool can be found in your appendices. The tool included measures on whether the program offer serves communities experiencing marginalization and persistent disparities in the experience of homelessness and homeless services. The tool also included measuring whether a program offer was designed to address racial and other disparities, as well as if the program offer had demonstrated effectiveness at addressing disparities in their outcomes. This, alongside with a review of program data, helped us to prioritize programs serving vulnerable populations, as well as understand who would be impacted by cuts. Next slide, please. So because an essential component to the equity work of the Homeless Services Department is working to eliminate disparities in homeless services, all HSD program offers that fund services include an equity metric. This slide shows how we review this in our program offers. In order to impact disparities in the experience of homelessness and homeless services, communities experiencing disparities must be served at or above the rate at which they experience homelessness. Our previous equity metric measured whether Black communities, Indigenous communities, and other communities of color, when grouped together, were served at or above the rate they were experiencing homelessness. Now we review 5 priority populations separately for proportional services. This is an improvement because lumping all BIPOC communities together not only erases the unique experiences and needs of different communities of color, as well as obscures inequities experienced by particular communities, it also inaccurately assesses whether the services we fund are culturally responsive or are impacting the disparities communities experience. Disaggregating data will allow us to evaluate equity and monitor disparities in our system for particular communities. Next slide, please. So this slide goes more in depth into how we have built equity into our program instructions for provider services along with the performance metric. There's a lot of detail here, but the primary things to note are that we are continuing the practice of disaggregating race and ethnicity for provider level performance reporting. And on top of that, when we look at proportionality of who is served, we are tailoring our comparator population to the most appropriate group. So as an example, for proportion of people accessing shelter and people being placed into housing, we would use the by name list of people who are homeless. But for prevention services, our comparator would be a Census Bureau data set of people earning less than 125% of the federal poverty level. This data is available on a per program level as well as the whole system level. Our goal is to evaluate racial equity both at the system level, looking at the bigger picture, and at the component or program level to enable us to identify areas where we may be falling short, and also in order to add support where it's needed. So as an example, we might recognize that there's a need to add or expand culturally specific programming at the system level, or maybe there's a need to support to provide support and accountability to culturally responsive programming within all service delivery at the program or provider level. This also provides providers comparison data and benchmarks for their own program evaluation. And lastly, we have added a single qualitative question, which asks providers to describe the efforts that their agency or programs have engaged in to deliver services in a culturally responsive and or culturally specific manner. For programs where this is not applicable, this would be where they would explain that. This also offers providers an opportunity to elevate areas where we can support their improved cultural responsiveness. And now I will pass it to my colleague, Anna, for the next slide.
Good morning. Again, for the record, my name is Anna Plum, and I am the Deputy Director for the Homeless Services Department, soon to formerly known as the Joint Office. So I just wanted to remind us that we actually operate with 2 different community-level strategic plans, and we're going to go over those 2 plans in the next 2 slides. First, this slide focuses on the Homelessness Response Action Plan, which we like to call the HRAP. And this is linked to the Homelessness Response System Intergovernmental Agreement that was signed last year. This plan has a variety of detailed goals. Some of the major ones that we talk about a lot are up on this slide. And I'm not going to read through them, but I wanted to note for you that, again, this is a very detailed plan with lots of goals. And we have developed a way for you to see as we walk through the presentation where a goal or a strategy is linked to this plan. So that little house icon that you will see that throughout the presentation next to strategies, goals, and outcomes that align with the HRAP plan. Next slide, please. We are also guided by the SHS Local Implementation Plan. This is a plan that is required for all local implementation partners of the Supportive Housing Services measure. This plan was co-developed by the department and community members at the outset of the SHS measure funding, and it represents the community and the department's priorities on what was needed with SHS funding to add on to our existing homeless services system. Again, I'm not going to read through these goals because I think we know them pretty well, and we have a lot to get through, but we are similarly going to use in the presentation an icon to indicate when a strategy is in alignment with the LIP. So that little clipboard and the 3 little letters LIP, you will see next to things that align with the LIP. You're going to see lots of places where both icons are placed because there is substantial alignment between the 2 plans, which is good.
If we have questions, do you want to?
Yeah, so I think what Dan was talking about before is that there's going to be a natural break between sections. So I think, Anna, when you're done with this section, then we can open it up for questions, and then we'll try to do that.
I only have a few more slides, and then we're going to do a couple. I think there's another set of divisions we were hoping to get through, correct?
We can break after each section if you prefer, or we can go about halfway through our presentation and then break.
Shorter?
Shorter?
Yeah.
Because that way there's not so much distance, like, you said something like an hour and a half ago.
Yeah.
Okay. So then I'll get to these 3. and
Yeah.
Break after each section, and we'll just get it as far as we get to it.
Yeah, and we have 3 hours, so I know you have a lot of slides, but this is, this is important information. You have a lot of slides.
Yeah. All right, okay. I guess I'll have 3 more and then we'll pause. So next slide. We did want to pause and acknowledge sort of what we are working, what does homelessness in our community look like? And so as you all know, we launched a new population and services dashboard last month that we're really proud of. This is information from that dashboard, which gives us the sobering reality that over 14,000 people were experiencing homelessness in our community in February 2025. The next, we also can see what this looks like by race and ethnicity. And I want to make a note about the population proportions that you're going to see here. This slide shows the breakdown by race and ethnicity of everyone experiencing homelessness in February 2025. As Emily discussed, we do focus on who we're serving by race and ethnicity and other demographic groups as a part of our performance measurement. We are going to show several places where we compare who's being served to what the proportion of the population is. It may not always match these numbers. This is a monthly snapshot. When we look back at our performance, we're usually looking at a year of performance. So we'll look at what it looks like for that year. So just wanted to note, you might see slightly different proportions, and that's why, and I'm happy to answer questions if that comes up. Next slide. So that 14,000 number is higher than when we were here last year talking about the by name list. And we think that higher number is due to 2 things. Number 1, as a reminder, the data on our by name list is built from our service system. So as our services ramp up, we meet more people, we serve more people, we enter their information into our data system, our list gets larger. So not necessarily folks who are newly homeless, but we might be newly serving them with our expanded services. We do also see that inflow into homelessness is a part of why the list is growing. So this graph is from our dashboard, and it shows inflow to our data system of folks experiencing homelessness and outflow from that list on a monthly basis. And again, inflow and outflow from that list isn't necessarily absolutely inflow and outflow into homelessness, but it's the best way we have to measure it. What you can see is that inflow has outpaced outflow every month but one for the last year. That's a significant challenge for our region. And it's something we're thinking about, and you'll hear us talk about some potential inflow analyses later in the presentation. We do have more detailed information about inflow and outflow in the categories in the appendix, and it's also available on the dashboard. And I am going to I was going to pass over to Antoinette, but now I will pause for questions.
Brim Edwards.
Microphone? Sorry. I'm just going to start with that slide right there. What happened that month where we actually had sort of the magic crossing over?
So my theory there is that is the end of a couple special initiatives that focused on housing folks, both Housing Multnomah Now and Oregon All In.
Okay. Great. And then on slide 15, it's the dashboard slide, but it follows 2 pages of goals. And I'm wondering, does this budget have a specific goal for reducing the overall number of homelessness or unsheltered homelessness? And if not, why not? Because it seems like that's sort of the umbrella that everything else would be nested under.
Yeah, we are guided by the goals that were developed by a set of community members. So both the HRAP and the LIP were developed by us and in partnership with other community partners. That is not a goal that was set at this time. I do know that we are in the process of thinking about the HRAP and potentially the LIP again, and thinking about KPIs on a larger system level. So we are guided by by the community's goals that are set with us and other people.
And this is something that we're going to talk about a little bit more next Friday when we have our joint city-county meeting, but we are going to be reviewing and updating the HRAP goals to incorporate some of the information we now have because of the new data dashboard. And I think that is where we can have that conversation about what is realistic in terms of setting the numbers of the reductions in overall number of people experiencing homelessness.
I think it's going to be really important because it also goes to just if there's going to be a renewal of the measure at Metro, that people understand that we're making progress. And we have goals around the larger, now that we know more. So I'm delighted to hear that we're going to have that conversation. And then my last question is on slide 13. There is, under the goals, add 1,060 shelter units, and then it says 832 funded as of FY '26, and then there's 40 new in 2026. So how are we getting to the 1,060 if we've only funded a portion of it?
So we have some more detailed information on this later in the presentation. It's actually 1,000, but yes, we will talk about why that decision was made and how we view that meeting the plan.
Okay, because it doesn't seem to add up that we're going to meet our goal. Thank you.
I would like to respond to that if I can, Commissioner. I think absolutely our goal is to reduce homelessness, and that's our North Star. And the fact that you don't see it listed with these other goals shouldn't give anybody any concern that that's not our absolute target here. What you're seeing is a plan that reflects the full complexity of homelessness. It's inflow, it's outflow, it's housing, it's addiction, it's mental health, it's all the things that we all know about. And these plans, whether they're in these goals, whether they're in the LIP with Metro or the HRAP here in Multnomah County, they all roll up to that shared goal. And so we know, for example, that targeted strategies around people leaving carceral settings, leaving healthcare settings, leaving foster care, those goals need to be specific and actionable in order for us to achieve that larger objective of reducing homelessness.
I really appreciate that. And I think it's important that we call out sort of all the strategies that are going to get to that. I also think for our broader community who aren't going to be looking at the 10 strategies or however many there are underneath it and those sort of what I would call sub goals, because they're going to be looking at sort of overarching, like, do those all roll up into something that gets us to a larger goal, which I think the community, I think we'll be surprised if there's not a larger goal, because that's, I think, what they expect. Like, you all pay attention to the complexities and what needs to happen, but it should result in an overall reduction.
I totally agree, and I appreciate you calling it out, and that's why we as a team and as a county have placed so much emphasis on the dashboard. That's our way to measure our progress, and that doesn't measure progress on any one goal, but all of them collectively. And I think we're certainly using that data to drive all of these strategies, but maintaining our focus on that larger objective that you're calling out.
And if I could, one thing I think is important to highlight here is this additional shelter beds is not the totality of shelter beds you all are funding, correct?
Correct. You keep spoiling our slides, but yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
I have a question going back to the equity slides. I appreciate the breaking it out. I think that's really helpful. I am hoping we're also tracking by age, type of disability or disability status, LGBTQ, and gender. Can we get that?
Yes, we are. And yes, probably, yeah.
Okay, because I do have concerns that some subgroups, we have not figured out the right package of supports. So I appreciate what's been done, but I would love to have that conversation.
I would just add the dashboard has age, gender, race, ethnicity. does not have sexual orientation or disability status. Those two are a little bit more complicated, but we'll follow up with sort of what we can and can't do there.
Thank you. Who's,
Okay, now, next, slide 17, please.
So just again, sorry. So again, my name is Antoinette Payne. I am the finance lead over at the Homeless Services Department. I will do a high-level overview of the department's FY26 approved budget. If we can go to the next slide, please. So the Homeless Services Department FY26 approved operating budget is $304.2 million, which is 11% or a $38 million decrease from our FY25 adopted budget. The department in this budget has $26.7 million of new and restored general fund investments that the chair put in her budget. The department's FY26 budget includes 115 FTE positions, representing a decrease of 7 FTE from the adopted FY25 budget. If we can go to the next slide, please. So today, we're going to spend the majority of our presentation discussing our operating budget of $304.2 million. However, we wanted to uplift that the department has about $4.2 million in contingencies, which consists of about $3.3 million in reserves allocated for SHS, representing approximately 3% of the targeted 10% reserve that we like to have. And then number two, we have about $900K designated for future rent guarantee program and the Regional Strategies Implementation Fund. So as a result of the FY26, the total budget, including operating and contingency, is $308.4 million. Next slide. In this slide, the FY26 approved budget is compared to the FY25 adopted budget across the department's 4 major funds. Here are some key observations. A 69% increase in the general fund is primarily due to $26.7 million in new and restored general fund investments, and that's the first column. A 60% increase in federal and state funds due to higher state funding, which is the second column. And here's what Emily has uplifted around our budget for this year, or FY26. A 37% decrease in SHS funding for FY26 is due to 2 attributing factors. One, $21.5 million reduction in the forecast for FY26. And lastly, we have less carryover one-time only funding than we have had in previous years. Next slide. This slide illustrates the trend of the department's fund from FY19 pre-COVID SHS through FY26. It provides a visual context of how our funding has evolved over time. The department's budget has grown by over 300% in the past 7 years. The significant increase is primarily due to supportive housing services, represented in magenta on the graph. In prior years, including the approved FY26, supportive housing service has constituted around half or more of the department's overall budget. Due to the significant carryover and decrease forecast, FY26 shows a reduction in SHS, which is seen in the 8th bar. Next slide. Similar to the previous slide, this illustrates the trend of the department's FTE from FY19 through FY26. It provides a visual context of how our FTE has evolved over time. This graph shows the department's growth and/or adjustments in the relations to our budget. Next slide. The department's budget shows the largest expenditure for contractual services, totaling $251.9 million, or 82.8% of the budget. This reflects the department's operational model of collaborating with community partners to deliver services on the behalf of the county, a practice consistent with the 80% of the budget allocated to contractual service over the past 5 years. Personnel costs represents the second largest expense at $21.7 million, accounting for 7.1% of the budget. And the remainder of the 10.1% is for materials, supplies, and internal services. Next slide, please.
Let me suggest we pause there before you dive into the divisions. I think the overall look should be familiar to many of you, but we want to take questions. If there are questions just about the overall year over year and where we're starting this discussion.
What accounts for the significant growth in materials and supplies?
A lot of that is the room block agreements that we have for our shelters. Room block or lease agreements that we have with our motel shelters for,
And that's not under contractual services, that's
No.
under,
it's materials and supplies.
Just a question about the slide 22, which is the bar graph. Having been there when we had sort of that fluctuation, joining the commission when we had this sort of that large fluctuation, I'm curious, do we think that, at least for the next couple of years, that we're more on a stable, so less fluctuation between the segments of the graph?
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that. I think FTE is always a great subject of scrutiny, and I never shy away from it. We need to be able to rationalize and justify every employee here. In 22 to 23, the SHS monies grew pretty quickly, obviously, from 21 through 23. And when I got here, we were understaffed for the size of the budget that we were administering and the number of provider contracts we were administering. And there may have been some struggling as a result. So we made a big leap, as you can see, from 24 to 25. And that got us to where I think we're right-sized. So the short answer to your question is yes, I think we're in roughly the right spot going forward as SHS funds level out. But I just want to acknowledge we did do some catch-up there from 24 to 25. That's displayed there. I felt comfortable about that. And one of the things we did was we benchmarked, and we didn't bring those forward this year, but last year, during last year's budget cycle, you may remember we benchmarked to see how many FTE per $1 million of spending, and did a couple other benchmarks, and those all looked solid to us. So I think going forward in the range that we're in, assuming the revenue and the size and scope of program stays roughly the same, we're at the right spot.
And sort of same question about the previous slide, which seems like we're in a more stable versus like it going up and down or.
And absolutely, and that was one of my 3 points, is part of my goal has been to build a sustainable system so that we can manage the fluctuations, the different strategies, but you have to have the infrastructure in place to do that. And this is the people infrastructure.
Thank you.
If we can jump to slide 24. So we're going to transition over to an overview of our budget at the division level. This section will dive into the budget and key priorities for each division. Within the department, we will examine strategic investments that underpin our operational plans and service goals for the upcoming fiscal year. This detailed review will provide an understanding of how our resources are being allocated across the department to help meet the needs of the community. Next slide, please. The Homeless Services Department has 5 divisions: system support, access and coordination, safety off and on the streets, housing placement and retention, supportive housing, admin and operations. Further details regarding the core functions of these divisions will be provided by my colleagues. Next slide, please. This slide demonstrates the budget by division. In the upcoming slides, we will dive into each division's budget and FTE in more detail. This slide gives you an overview and a general picture of the department structure and how our resources are distributed. Next slide, please. I'm going to move on into administration and operations, which provides the essential infrastructure and support for the entire department. This division handles core functions, including executive team, business services, HR, and communications. We will now dive into the specific budgets, goals, and indicators of this division. Next slide, please. This division's FY26 budget is $8.8 million, and it includes 35 FTE positions, representing a decrease from the prior year. Due to the administrative nature of its functions, the majority of the department is funding comes from the general fund. Next slide. The next few slides, we will discuss 3 of our overall division goals. So one of our overarching goals is to increase diversity in recruitment pools. Our diversified recruitment outreach has expanded the pool of diverse candidates and has led to increased diverse hire in our department. Next slide, please. Timely contract execution is the second goal. It's critical because 80% of our budget involves community partner contracts. We significantly improved contracts execution speed in FY25. 80% of our contracts were executed by July 1, demonstrating these improvements have been made. Next slide, please. And our third goal for this department is the timely reimbursement of invoices. We've continuously improved our process in monitoring and performance to achieve an average of about 10 days of reimbursement. As you can see in this chart up above, we are under those 10 days of reimbursement, so our average is about 7.2% for the whole year of FY24. Next slide, please. And I will pause to see if you all have any questions. If not, I will pass it to Anna.
Questions just on this division.
How did you achieve that? How did you achieve being able to pay accounts invoices in 7.2 days on average? That's very impressive.
So we established in our group, it's called the Accounts Payable Innovation Lab. And so what we do is we've worked with programs to streamline our processes. A lot of processing invoices is a shared responsibility between program and finance. So we spent months trying to streamline our processes. Also in FY25, we had hired an additional AP staff to help with processing a lot quicker. And then on a monthly basis with that group, we look at our key performance indicators to understand how we're doing, and if there are one-offs, we investigate to see why.
We had listening sessions with the chair in 23, and we heard a lot of feedback from providers that this was a priority for them.
No, this is great.
Yeah, great work. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to cover the next 2 divisions. I'll pause at the end of this one for questions. The next division I want to talk about is System Support, Access, and Coordination. As the name implies, this division houses the work that we do to support our holistic homelessness response system. This includes data collection, equity training, coordinated access. There's a lot in this division. So I apologize, these are our wordiest slides in this division because a lot of it is things that we have to sort of talk about with words. It's not as quantitative as looking at our service outcomes. Next slide, please. We do want to start with a story for each division, and so this is a little bit about how this specific budget delivers. Cross-sector case conferencing, which I struggle to say clearly, but I will do my best, is a great example of how the various aspects of this division support a dynamic, effective, and efficient system. With unique data sharing efforts led by the staff of this division alongside staff across the department, we have created a cross-sector case conferencing pilot that connects housing staff, healthcare staff, and staff from our partner department, Aging, Disability, and Veterans Services. We are working to identify folks across data systems to find folks who have high needs and help make sure their needs are met. So an example here is there was an individual who had circulated through multiple systems. They had rising comorbidities, which meant they had been rejected by a few providers, and their permanent supportive housing placement was at risk. But via cross-sector case conferencing, we were able to make sure that person was able to get a direct medical intervention that their service provider had previously not been able to access. We were also able to add additional wraparound service supports to stabilize that person in housing. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the operating budget and the FTE for this division. I just want to note the decrease in the operating budget because it kind of explains some of what we do in this division. So we heard from our CBAC, In FY 2025, there were $10 million in workforce stabilization grants in this division. So part of that decrease is we no longer have those in the budget for this year due to resource constraints. We also had $2 million in our operating budget last year for our Data Mart project. That was one-time only funding to modernize our data systems, and I'll talk more about the impact of that later. That is complete. We're still building it out, but the major portion of that one-time only funding has been spent, and we have that done, so that's no longer in the budget this year. Next slide, please. So I have 3 pages of goals and outcomes for this. Thank you for your patience. Again, we do a lot in this division and we wanted to call it out. I'm going to start at the bottom. One thing we do in this division is we have staff who help us make sure that our community and our provider voice is heard. Emily noted that we have 5 advisory committees and we host 2 to 3 provider conferences annually as well. That's really important that we maintain that robust continuum of community advisory committees to help us know how our work is impacting the community and how we can improve. And we track, we respond to and track our response to those recommendations and implementation of those recommendations when appropriate. This is also the division that houses our data modernization and all of our data work. So we have 2 goals around that. We've talked about the dashboard, and the Data Mart was something we also did last year, which allowed us to pull better data from our existing system. We are now in the process of using that better data more efficiently. We are also working to procure a new HMIS system. That process is underway. We have also created new outcome metrics that are going into our fiscal year 2026 contracts, which will match our budget reporting, which will match our performance dashboard. So a lot of work going on there. Next slide, please. That is related to our ongoing work to evolve our data and prioritization processes. So I talked about cross-sector case conferencing. That relies upon data sharing and other sort of wonky things around data. So we are continually working to identify better ways to use data and connect data across systems to serve people better. This division also supports the folks who support our culturally specific and responsive system capacity. Ensuring that we are serving folks to reduce disparities is key to both of our community plans, and supporting culturally specific providers is a goal in both of our plans as well. Our status for this year is we're trying to maintain the current capacity of our small and culturally specific providers and explore opportunities for growth. We do this via technical assistance, training, and capacity building for our providers. Ultimately, we look at whether or not our delivery is culturally responsive, and we hope to expand culturally specific capacity. However, that expansion is challenged by resource constraints in this year. Next slide. And then we would, of course, like to expand our cross-sector case conferencing. I gave you an example of a success there. We have a lot of people experiencing homelessness. We're working with Community Solutions to think creatively. Cross-sector case conferencing is complicated with the size of our by name list. And so we're looking for how we can expand in a reasonable way given the realities of our community. And then finally, we are working to broadly implement our new coordinated access tool. We designed a new coordinated access tool that does a better and more equitable job of prioritizing folks for services. We have implemented that out in the community, and we are continuing to support folks in that new tool implementation. Next slide, please. So this is a list that I will not read for you. I could talk about this all day, but I will not. I talked a lot about reporting and analytical improvements. We could, if you have questions, I can go into any of these. We wanted to show you all of the work that we have going on for reporting and for data improvements. And I just want to call out the quote, and that's related to the Data Mart. You see the Data Mart build out with IT. We've completed the major milestone, but we're continuing to use that. And one of our staff said that they are now able to pull a report in 2 hours that would have taken them days prior to having the Data Mart implemented. Next slide. In addition to data work, we are doing in-depth evaluations. We recently published a best practices shelter report that is online and that we're using as we think about shelter across our system, what makes an effective shelter. I do want to call out that we know inflow is a major aspect, and we are planning an inflow analysis. And there are other studies here that we are either in the middle of doing or planning to start very soon. Next slide. So again, this division doesn't have as much sort of numbers we can count because a lot of it is projects that are underway to support the whole system. But we did want to call out access to our coordinated access assessment. So in calendar year 2024, over 4,500 people were assessed by the coordinated access tool. And this is how that breaks down by race and ethnicity across the folks who were assessed. Okay, that is the end of that division. I will pause before I move into the next one.
I have a quick question, Anna. On slide 35, you say there's a timeline for replacement has been identified for the new HMIS. Apologies if you shared this elsewhere, but what is that timeline?
Great question. So we are in the process of, is it phase 4 of the procurement now? So we're starting phase 4. So we have 2 finalists. And so there's one final phase in selecting the vendor, which we hope to have done the next couple months. And then, of course, implementing that new process across all 3 counties and all of the providers will be a long process. We are planning for this fiscal year, all of next fiscal year, and then into the fiscal year after that for full implementation.
Thank you. Thank you.
7. So sorry, they're 25, 26, 27. They're starting this year, yeah.
A question about slide 38. A lot about reporting, analytical improvements. And I don't see it specifically called out, but maybe it's built into one of these. The whole discussion we've had in the past about sort of contractors with their performance metrics and using the contracting process as a sort of performance management's maybe not the right word, but making sure that we're, you know, as we're setting targets like exit from shelter, that we have, for example, like set goals, and then we're looking at what providers are, you know, hitting their metrics.
Yeah, so that's in a couple different places. So the contract monitoring from the data mart that says October 2025, that is sort of the final phase of a process that started in this fiscal year. And I didn't touch on it in detail, so I'm happy to do so. I've mentioned before that sometimes we had contracts that were slightly misaligned in what they were asking for. So one contract might say place X number of households, and another might say place X number of people. So those individual contracts had goals they were working to meet, but it was hard for us to compare across them because of nuances like that. We've done a ton of work across all of our divisions to streamline that across so that all of the similar contracts have similar outcomes. Those are being built into our FY 2026 contracts as we speak, and our data mart was built around those newly defined outcomes. So those are already what's being pulled into our performance dashboards. We can look at it at a system level now. We are looking at it in an analog way now via provider reports that they report quarterly to us. That October date will be when we will have sort of internal at your fingertips monitoring of those contract level outcomes. That will start out internally. Our hope is that we will also give the contractors themselves access to that so they can look at their outcomes in real time with our support. And then I wanted to call out the digital training that you see in July 2025. We are also working to provide more accessible real-time training on our HMIS systems to our providers so they can have that training at their fingertips as well. If they forget something, they can go in and get trained up on that right away, as opposed to waiting to contact somebody to get that training.
Great.
I don't know if it's this slide or coming up. One of the things that I'm interested in is the subsection of individuals experiencing homelessness who are engaged in other services, either through the county or potentially the Oregon Health Authority or our CCOs, and the duplication or lack of coordination between various case managers and our ability to know that that exists. One of the things that I have been talking to people about is specifically people with severe persistent mental illness, but that's definitely only one. There are certainly lots of groups who may have some level of care coordination, or they have a housing navigator there, and over here they're working with somebody. To what degree can we, or are we planning to be able to track that? And I guess I would put this on the as we improve the data that we're getting, how do we move from competing case management to collaborative teams? I'm familiar with a model, again, for people with SPMI called ACT teams, which looks at different aspects, and it is a team approach. I happen to think that has tremendous value, but you kind of have to know who's driving the ship and what your piece of the pie is. So I put that out here. Again, it's definitely not everybody. It's a subset who may be receiving some level of case management because of something else going on. But I want to flag one, how do we collect that? So we know who the people that they're working with are, particularly if it's county funded or CCO funded. And then second, how do we build a process of like, oh, I'm looking at Megan's individual case file and I didn't know Megan had a relationship with Cascadia. I want to be able to call Cascadia and say, hey, I'm working with Megan on housing. What are your thoughts? How do we collaborate? That's kind of a next, I know we're still building the foundation, but I want a level of intentionality because I think it is a way of maximizing the resource that we're paying for and not working at either cross purposes or not knowing what the other hand is doing.
It's a great question. So I think that case conferencing pilot is a really good example of how we can do that and are doing that. The FUSE program is another place where we are doing that work. But that's why we have that. One of our goals is to evolve that process. So that evolved data and prioritization process, we may have put that a little bit too much jargon, but we are working to figure that out. And there's easier and harder things, right? It's easier to understand the landscape, but the release of information about what you can share with whom and why, we're trying to work through that piece now to get that bureaucratic barrier out of the way so we can respect folks' rights, but also share information. And where we need that and where we don't, within the county, there's all kinds of work going on there. So we are focused on that exact question, and there's a lot of work being done on that this year.
And I do want to add, I think this is a really important conversation and something we've been talking about. And I think there have been attempts over the years to how do we get at this, whether it's for a very specific part of the population or more broadly. This is also a conversation that's happening at the metro level as we're looking at how we share data regionally, across different organizations or different areas of work like public safety or health or homeless services. And so it really timely. And I think we can delve into that and provide more information about not just homeless services department, which is just one piece of this, but really the conversations that are happening more broadly on that.
And we are hopeful that within the homeless services realm, our new HMIS will allow us to have better insight in the field. So we're looking, for example, for a mobile outreach tool. That was a very important part of our procurement, that if I am out talking to someone and I meet them and I start to enter their name, it should pop up if they're already in there. And as I should be able to see some of the services they are accessing, at least within the homeless services realm. So that is a piece we're moving toward, but it doesn't speak to the larger like cross-sector coordination.
I just have a couple of follow-ups here. One is on this case conferencing. Please don't overcomplicate release of information. I don't think people actually understand HIPAA, and we make this more complicated than it actually is. The other is, my understanding is we've just opened up case conferencing to people under 55, and I think we need to be really pushing on that to make sure that we're expanding. I think we heard from Mindy at the SOC meeting. Sorry, that's a lot of acronyms. Mindy at the Homelessness Response System Steering and Oversight Committee, that the other counties are further along on this, and it's something that we need to push on. So it would be helpful to know if there's particular needs you all have to push and move that forward. And then the one other piece I had was on the contracting conversation. I would love to see other departments have the same outcomes that you all do, particularly if they're working with the same population. And if that's not something that is planned, I will be submitting a budget note to make sure that your outcomes are showing up in other departments when it comes to homeless services and particularly SHS dollars.
I just have a question on slide number 36, that support culturally specific and responsive system capacity. It's showing that it's currently not included in the budget. Is that correct?
Oh, sorry, it is.
It is included in the budget.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just confused by the note where it says challenged by
I can explain one example of that. That would be helpful.
Yeah, please.
So for example, we in fiscal year 2025 had budget for 400 additional units of permanent supportive housing. We 200 of those were going to be tenant-based. So I, Anna, am said, you are eligible, you can go find a housing unit. We are pulling back on those 200. It's not a cut to anyone who had housing, but we cannot put those out into the world. All of those 200 units were going to be supported by culturally specific providers, and they were going to be geared towards very specific communities. So the act of pulling back on those 200 units of permanent supportive housing means that we are, we had some providers that were culturally specific that were ready to do that work, and we're not able to add that capacity to the system. So that's what I meant more specifically. But the work that we are doing to support our providers across the continuum is in the budget.
Got it, great. And then the other question I have about just the systems, we're only collecting data from the folks, from the programs that we're funding, right? So for example, for like City Team, we're not collecting information from them. They don't have access to the system.
Correct.
Okay, great.
There are some organizations that put their data into HMIS, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. So for example, we do report on, we receive federal and state funding we're sort of we're the coordinator of federal and state funding via the continuum of care. That does show up in some of our system reporting, but organizations that get no public funding are not in HMIS.
Great, and then I appreciate just seeing just the alignment and working with DHS or with the Human Services and everything like that. This is great and going in the right direction. Thank you.
Before we move on, just wanted to provide a comment on the data that's going to be available in performance in October. I'm really excited to hear that providers will be able to see their own data, because there's lots of research to show that that is a powerful motivator for people, like keep going, or we need to make a shift. But oftentimes, if people don't have access to the data, they don't have any idea, like a shift needs to happen, or they need to put the pedal down.
I was talking to someone on our team who was talking to providers about this, and their providers were so excited. And the employee that I was talking to, they were like, it just made me, and they do data stuff. They're like, it made me remember how important the data we do is, because the providers were so excited to have that access. So I agree.
Okay, thank you. Let's go safety on and off the streets.
Okay, my slide numbers are off, so I actually don't know what the right. Thank you. When you print, it gives you the wrong number. Thank you. Okay. So I'm now going to talk about the safety on and off the streets division. This is not our most popular named division, so I'll talk a little bit about what that means. Safety on the streets are the services that we fund to keep people safe who are living outside or somewhere not fit for human habitation, primarily outreach and other work that we do to help connect with folks who are living outside and connect them to services that help them eventually move inside into permanent housing or to shelter as a transition. Safety off the streets are the things that we fund that help people exit the streets in a temporary basis. So that's primarily shelter and day centers. That's what's the primarily what's funded in this division. Next slide, please. So we wanted to talk a little bit about our safety on the streets. Hopefully you've all seen the video of Adele. Adele is an outreach worker with Cascadia Behavioral Health, and she is out there every day meeting folks, building a relationship, and then helping those folks connect to the services that will hopefully get them inside. We've talked a lot about outreach at the board recently, and we wanted to highlight her story as some of the effective outreach work we do in our community. Next slide. This is the changing in our operating budget from 25 to 26 for this division. Next slide. Okay, so the next three divisions are going to use a lot of service data, and I just wanted to take a minute to note a little bit what that's going to look like, and I'm going to get wonky, so I appreciate your patience. We've talked about our new data dashboard. That shows updated population and service data for the whole system. To Commissioner Jones-Dixon's point, that includes some services that we don't necessarily fund. Our federal and state services are a part of that whole system. When we look at trends over time in a few slides, the FY21 through 24 is going to be from that system dashboard, so it's going to show a full system performance, and that will include some federal and state funding. For shelter, that doesn't make a large impact because we mostly fund shelter, so you can't see a difference. Our 25 and 26 estimates that we're going to show to you are what you see in your program offer performance measures. It was very important to us that our budget presentation reflect what is in our budget. So you will see that our 25 estimates and our 26 estimates, if you added up all our program offers, that's what you're going to see in those columns. There are places where that's going to look a little bit odd because the system data has federal and state and our budget does not. We will call that out so it's not too confusing, and we can follow up if there's some complicating factors there. I do also want to note that we have noticed that our 25 estimates could use some work. So there are places where our 25 estimates, I'll talk about what we think is actually going on there as we walk through it. Next slide. So we wanted to start by looking at who we serve. So in fiscal year 2024, over 9,000 people accessed shelter in our community. And what that looked like by race and ethnicity across that year is shown on the slide here. And we'll do some more comparisons about what that looks like in terms of serving folks and reducing disparities in a few slides. Next slide, please. To your question, Commissioner Moyer, this is what access to shelter looked like for age and gender in fiscal year 2024.
Question about that. How does that compare to the overall number of people experiencing homelessness? Is that reflective? Is it off?
I will have to follow up. I don't know. Yeah, off the top of my head. For both? Okay, next slide. This shows where we provide our shelter services across the community. This is our new shelter map on our new services dashboard, and it does show shelters by type. I do want to note, again, our dashboard right now is updated for February 2025, and this shelter data is built on HMIS data. That is why you don't see Oak Street Village on the map yet. There were not yet folks entering their data into HMIS for that. It wasn't open yet in February, so it will show up in the next one. But yes, we knew you were going to ask.
So Anna, I just want to confirm, because I always, are these county and city shelters both?
The city shelters are on here as well, yeah.
So county and city shelters, but not like privately run, privately owned shelters?
Correct. The privately run, privately owned do not enter the data into HMIS.
Okay, all right.
So any shelter who enters the data into HMIS is on here.
Okay, thank you.
With the exception, thank you, Kanoi, we are not showing our behavioral health or our DSV on the map because of confidentiality reasons. So there are some dots missing that represent our DSV shelters and our behavioral health motel shelters.
Great, thank you.
If something were completely privately funded, it wouldn't be on this, but
Yeah, so for example, like Portland Rescue Mission, we do not provide them with any funding and they do not enter their data into HMIS. They could, we would welcome them to enter their data into HMIS, but it is work that we're not funding them to do, and providers have a hard time doing work they're not funded to do.
so I'm just curious if we would like them to do that, wouldn't we want to provide some sort of incentive?
I think it's worth talking about, yeah, what that would look like. Next slide, please. So here's our strategic goals and outcomes. Of course, our goal is to maintain a robust continuum of shelter services across our community. The specific strategy right now is fulfilling the community sheltering strategy, to your point, Commissioner Brim-Edwards. Our status is, as of this budget, we will be funding 832 of the 1,000 units included in the chair's proposed budget. We do look at the number of shelter units in the community and the people served. We just looked at people served, and I'll talk about units in a minute. We do also want to make sure that those shelters are built to support positive exits. We have a significant amount of funding in our budget for placement out of shelter this year. And our strategy is to promote higher bed turnover by making sure that those shelters are places where people can access housing to exit the shelter. We do that via in-reach and other tactics to help folks access housing services. Next slide, please. And again, we do other things. So ensuring shelters serve priority populations, we've talked about this a lot. It is really important to us that as people are accessing our shelter and exiting that shelter, that matches who is in our population. So we look at whether our priority populations are being served at or above the rate they experience homelessness, and I'll show you that data in just a minute. And we do this by increasing our culturally specific shelter capacity where we can, and monitoring the demographics of who's accessing shelter and how that shelter is working for them in terms of access to housing. Next slide. This is what some of that looks like. This is the number of folks who were served in shelter over the last several fiscal years. Again, I think that our FY 2025 estimate was conservative. I do not anticipate that we will serve fewer people in shelter this year. We turn our estimates for 2025 in February, and I think we were just a little conservative this year on what we thought we were going to serve. Again, we wanted to put forward to you what is in our program offers, so we're not presenting data that looks different than what you can find in your budget. But looking at our service data, we anticipate that number will be higher, and it will be closer to what you're seeing in 2026. And in fiscal year 2024, 23% of shelter exits were to permanent housing. Next slide. To get to the question on how many units of shelter are in the community that we fund, this is what that looks like now, what it will look like after the chair's proposed budget, if it proceeds as is. We do note the city units in the budget. On the city side, that assumes that all of the currently open shelter units stay open and are funded in next fiscal year. And it includes 200 of the mayor's new overnight beds. Simply just we had to choose a cutting off point, so that's what we added. It did not include some of the ones he's already announced adding, so those are not in this number. We want to note that right now, as of phase 1 and 2 of the community sheltering strategy, there are 383 units in development, and then this budget adds 90 more. 50 of those are units for LGBTQIA 2S+ adults, and then an additional 40 units of family shelter. Next slide. We do also want to look at our progress on the community sheltering strategy. So as total in phase 1 and phase 2, we have 782 units funded and either open or in development. And again, this budget adds 90, so that's 832 out of the 1,000. So it's 168 under the goal. And we talked about this a lot in our transmittal letter, but I want to pause and talk about why that is, because this was not a decision that was made lightly. We are in a situation of serious resource constraint, and we heard our CBAC talk about a balance of services. We need to ensure that we are funding a holistic and balanced homeless services system. And any more shelter units would have meant that we had to make significant cuts in our housing placement programs and our supportive housing programs that could have resulted in folks losing housing or us not being able to place people at a rate that will move people through our system. So we made the difficult decision to balance the number of units we add with the services that are really important to make sure those shelters are efficient and effective pathways to housing. Next slide. You'll see this slide in a couple of our service areas. This helps us look at.
Anna, there was a question.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just trying to track the phase 1, 2, and 3 versus the 2,000 number. The previous slide of county current is 2,000. Yeah, is 2,077, or that's proposed, 2,071, but then how does this next slide relate to that number? I'm confused.
Sorry, Mike. And I can give you, we have a more detailed breakdown, and there is one in the appendix that is a little bit more detailed as well. The distinction there is the 2,077 are open right now, and 383 are in development. When you go to the next slide, the phase 1 and phase 2, some of those are in development and some of those are open. But I can give you a more detailed breakdown of what that looks like. It is confusing.
Well, if I could, Anna, it's also right. So the sheltering strategy is a subset of the total sheltering that the Homeless Services Department does.
That is correct. The sheltering strategy was a specific additional goal, and we have funded and continue to fund other units in addition. So the bulk of that 2,000 are units that we have funded for a long time that have been added over time. In the appendix, thank you, Commissioner, you can see, we didn't put it in the main presentation because you've seen it before, but we did include those 3 slides that show how we've added units across time and shows sort of the dots being added to the map. So the 2,077, the bulk of those are shelters that have been added over the last several years, and then the community sheltering strategy is a 3-year plan to add more. Yeah.
124 to 126.
Thank you. In the appendix. Okay, can you go forward one more slide, please, Marina? Oh, one more. Yes, there we go. So this is, again, how we look at if we're meeting our goal to serve people at the rate that would support reducing disparities of who's experiencing homelessness. You'll see this a couple times. I'll walk through it now. The green bar is sort of the service outcome. So for example, of people who were in shelter in 2024 fiscal year, 20.4% of folks accessing shelter were Black, African American, or African. In comparison, 23.5% of our by name list of folks experiencing homelessness across that year were Black or African American. That means we are not yet meeting the goal for that population of serving them in shelter at or above their rate of homelessness. This is something we are focusing on in both the HRAP and the HSD spaces to think about how we can better serve this population in shelter. We can also see we're not meeting that for the Hispanic Latinx population as well, and we will think about that as well moving forward. This is why we collect this data, so we can design our interventions around that. Next slide, please. This looks at, of people who were in shelter, how many exited to housing. So for example, of Asian or Asian American people who accessed shelter in fiscal year 2024, how many of those folks exited to housing? And the answer is 29%. We do also look at proportion of exits by race ethnicity, but this is one way to look at, we slice and dice a lot of ways to better understand how we're serving folks. So we thought this was a good one to present. Next slide. We did want to note what was restored in the chair's proposed budget from what we had reduced in our submitted budget. The chair's budget added additional funding to keep more day centers open. It also preserved 230 units of adult shelter that we had proposed to cut in order to provide a balanced system, as well as adding units of shelter, 50 adult LGBTQIA2S+ units, those were actually in our budget, and then an additional 40 family units on top of that. I do want to note this budget also includes $10 million of one-time only county general fund to support the city's SRV and task sites. We estimate that $10 million will support about 178 units of that shelter. And then our budget also includes $13.3 million of state funding, which will support about another 185 of those units. That is the end of the Safety On and Off the Streets division.
Okay, any additional questions? I know you have one. I will just say, I know this is new data about the Latina population, but that is something that I'm going to be very interested in hearing about strategies to address that disparity. Thank you.
Yep.
Sorry, slide 49, just very briefly, and maybe you said this, but I'm processing a lot of information. What's the new outreach strategy?
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about it, and I may phone a friend here, Kanoi, but I'll start. We, at the outreach work session a few weeks ago, we talked about our efforts to better coordinate outreach across the Homeless Services Department. So the Homeless Services Department is doing one piece, and that includes a couple different things. We are redesigning how we deploy outreach workers and doing a more geographically focused deployment, so folks are sort of assigned to a region. We are resourcing outreach teams across the system. We also have designed new outreach outcomes that, like I mentioned earlier, we're collecting that data weekly, and it will be better linked to the contract and the budget. That is all starting in fiscal year 2026. That is one piece of a larger countywide strategy around coordinating outreach that is being led by the COO's office. Did you want to?
And are there performance goals in the new outreach strategy?
Yes, there are. And those are the ones that we'll look at weekly, and we can follow up. I think actually some of them were in the packet that we provided for the outreach work session. I will double check, and if there are any others that were not in that packet, we can forward that, but those should be in the packet that you received for that.
Okay.
Do we provide outreach workers with clear paths for individuals they may encounter who would qualify for specialty services? Like if I ran into a senior who might qualify for our senior veteran and disability services, is there a clear, like, oh, I'm going to call this number right now and their mobile team can come or whatever? I'm just wondering how we do handoffs.
Good morning, everyone. Kanoi Eggleston. My pronouns are she and hers. I'm the director of programs, just for the record. You know, one piece, Commissioner Moyer, is that we have very skilled outreach workers who know those services as well. So if you think about things that we invest in around behavioral health outreach specifically, and so we rely heavily on the knowledge and information that frankly, the outreach workers have that themselves as well. And so we do have access points. We meet collaboratively across all of the outreach workers to share those access points when there are gaps or not. One thing about this strategy that I want to focus on is really geographic coverage across the whole county and coordination. And that'll be coordination of every HSD-funded outreach. And we currently don't have that. And so that, I think, in itself, too, will build another infrastructure for folks.
And again, this is my dream world of like where we could go. There's a system at OHSU that tracks bed capacity at every hospital, and then by type of unit in that hospital, ER versus ICU versus med surg. And I know that we're not there yet. I plug that as they're now also building it out for behavioral health. So I'm wondering if there could be some shared technology or information around, because I assume outreach workers spend a tremendous amount of time calling.
Yeah, well, and maybe Anna will speak, maybe you can speak to this with the new HMIS system. I'm on the review panel, so some of what I see is that as far as having it mobile and then being able to track where shelter utilization is or where other services are. And the whole point for at least outreach workers is that mobile capacity, so they can be able to do that and have access to other services around that are within and that you can see actually on the platforms of HMIS. Is that fair? Okay.
So I had a question on slide 52, and I was looking back into the appendix as well. But I think this is the first time I've seen that the county is saying that it's not going to meet the sheltering, the community sheltering goals. So as somebody who served on that smaller team, so I just want to note that, because in the past it was like, we're going to add here and subtract here, and this is, I think, a different piece. But one thing, I think that I'm missing the larger picture, because there's been also a lot of things happening. And so I'm trying to, like, in my mind, like, how do we tell the story about all the pieces that are happening? And I'm going to use an example of Portland. So I don't want to seem Portland-centric, but for the sake of this example, I think it would be helpful because, so for example, pardon? I have to always like look to you because I don't want to be like, I'm only thinking about Portland. But it's a Portland-specific example. So for example, we're doing, we've agreed to like pass through the 15 million from Metro to the city of Portland. And I'm assuming they're going to use a lot of that for shelter. And then also on July 1, we were going to take the cities, or not, like, take over operations of the cities, their safe rest villages and temporary alternative shelter sites, but we're not doing that. And so when I think in my mind, it's like, we are going to be meeting those goals and we're adding a lot of shelter. It's just in this particular piece. So I'm wondering, again, because I think we should be giving a more cohesive picture. And I know it's hard because the puts and takes with this city of Portland, there's a lot going on, but it seems like maybe the community sheltering strategy isn't the right way for us to be measuring that versus like we have some larger sort of graphic that shows the bigger shelter pieces and what's being added and then sort of divided by the city and county, cities and county, because this sort of siloed approach seems like it's not really telling the right story.
I will say, I really appreciate that because I do think, I mean, that was this board unanimously voted to send that money to the city of Portland when we receive it from Metro. But if we hadn't done that, or if Metro, just gave it to the county to decide what to do with, we could have made a lot of different decisions about how to use those dollars, including, ensuring that we are, following the goal set in the shelter strategy. So, and those dollars, as you said, like, will very likely go to shelter. So how do we have that narrative? So.
And same thing with like our money ask, our funding asked from the state.
Yeah.
Would be another thing. So I guess I think a revision so that we're clearly sharing with the community. I think one, that they're demanding that we have a being partnered with the with the local cities, but then also like, how does it all fit together versus like, we're doing our own thing, they're doing their own thing. So I guess I would hope that we're heading into the new year, then in a way in which we can talk about that in a way, or even next Friday when we're having that joint conversation with the city of like, how does it all fit together? And then my last question is on slide 55. And this is maybe a semantics conversation as well. So when you say chairs restorations, it's the chair's budget, so it's just making restorations from that, because it's confusing, because it's like it's just the chair's budget that she put things back in that the department had recommended out. So it's just, it really would be the chair's budget.
I mean,
I'm just trying to like, because it's confusing otherwise, because it's like, wait, did she add some stuff on later? Okay.
Oh, and it's really restorations from the proposed budget by the departments. Yeah.
Right, but it's, everything else we talk about is about the chair's budget. So it made it sound like that something came in afterwards, that something was restored after the proposed budget. So I just want to clarify that piece.
It's a good call out. You know, what do they say on social media? POV. And our POV for months has been our submission. And so we looked at these as restorations, but from your point of view and the public's point of view, it's absolutely the chair's budget.
Okay.
But it was restored
I
to
was
our
like,
submission.
wait, I didn't know about this, but this other thing in the budget process, but it's actually not a thing. It's.
Can I ask a couple questions? Okay. The pass-through money from Metro and then the chair's $10 million one-time only. I mean, I kind of appreciate that, like, we aren't putting that in our column, but like, we had a piece, well, certainly the 10 million from our budget is our column, but we're a team, and I absolutely view it that way. But I'm hoping that with that, there is an agreement that they are going to participate in our data system. Yes, love it. And then my second question is around the assumptions we made on state funding. How much are we assuming is coming? And I'm now quite nervous about that due to the revenue forecast. And I just want to like understand what portion of this is unknown.
Let me ask us to hold that. That's a great question. We actually have some slides, and I think it deserves the kind of discussion that you're trying to tee up. I think my understanding, what we're hearing from our government relations leaders at the county is that Multnomah County still looks good for its share of the pie, but the pie has shrunk, to your point. So we have, at the chair's request, we have been very conservative in what we estimated in our budget. So the numbers you're seeing today are numbers that we have a relatively high level of confidence in. We are asking for additional funds, as you all know, to go beyond what's in this budget. And we haven't put that in the budget because those are still speculative at this point. But I think the revenue forecast is something that we probably should really have a deeper discussion perhaps with the GR folks before we finalize our budget.
I just had one question. With the map, is it possible to add day centers on this as well, so we can see both the safety on and off the streets? And I think particularly because there's at least some conversations about reliance on day centers to be the service providers to the city's overnight only shelters, it might be helpful to see the geographic distribution of those as well.
That's a cool idea. We'll look into it.
Yeah, and those investments are relatively new, Commissioner Singleton, as you know, and we expanded those last year with the one-time only. But I think what you're referring to is now there's a reliance, certainly from the city, that these are part of an integrated system. The joint office is now funding those, and we need to be more clear about what our expectations and outcomes are for that funding.
Ideally, there's like, you know, tags where you can turn, yeah, where you can like check, like, I want to see all, you know, all shelters and day centers, or I just want to see day shelters, or I just want to see, you know what I mean? Like have an interactive map. Thank you.
Just additional, just requests. I don't need this now, but on page 55, the chair's budget, the one that's called Chairs of Restoration. Can I just get the detail on each of these? What specifically are we referring to? Thank you. I don't need it right now.
If we're ready, are we ready to move on? Yep. Okay, slide 56, please. All right. Good morning, you all. For the record, my name is Kanoy Eggleston. My pronouns are she and hers, and I'm the Director of Programs here at HSD. I'm going to walk us through the last two divisions of our department, and I'll start off with our Housing Placement and Retention Division. So this division is focused on assisting individuals and families in obtaining and maintaining housing stability. Support services are provided to help people gain access to housing, prevent homelessness, and retain housing. Next slide. One of the key components of housing placement and retention programming is rapid rehousing, which supports households in obtaining permanent housing stability as quickly as possible. So rapid rehousing provides a combination of limited duration short-term rent assistance and housing placement and retention support services. So think about things like case management services, right? Those housing searches, landlord negotiations, funds to cover move-in expenses, and of course, retention services. Rapid rehousing also provides assistance with income acquisition. So on this slide is an example of an RRH, or rapid rehousing program, that works with students who are experiencing housing instability and/or homelessness. The program provides rental assistance to students who are newly placed in housing and to students who are at risk of losing their housing. As John's story highlights beautifully, the impact of case management services combined with rental assistance has in providing critical supports to students' educational success and housing stability. Next slide. This slide shows us highlights the division's operating budget and staffing across this year and next year. So in fiscal year 26, you'll see a $77 million investment in housing placement and retention programs with an increase in general and state funds, while we see a reduction in supportive housing services funding. Next slide, please. All right, so as we move through our performance measures within this division, this slide highlights the different ways we can look at housing outcomes and outputs. So we have three main measures. The first is placed. And so what that means, it's a household that was physically moved into housing in that fiscal year. Sustained are households that were previously placed into housing and continue to receive rental assistance. And then we have retained, and that is a household who was previously placed into housing who no longer receives that rent assistance, and thus retention can be measured because it is the end of that rental assistance subsidy. We wanted to highlight these for a couple reasons. There's often confusion between sustained and retained measures. Second, that sustained measure is a new data piece, so we haven't been able to pull apart well in the past to show who is actively being supported, you know, in housing programs outside of the new placements, but now we can. And Anna briefly talked about that earlier. And then lastly, another reason why we want to highlight this is since we haven't had this data in the past, you will see some of our FY25 projections look a little out of place. Again, as Anna mentioned, that was something that we submitted in February before we understood the data well, and we can walk through what that looks like for this division here shortly. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So what this slide shows is who we serve in housing placement and retention programs. So this slide will highlight demographics of people served, specifically the percentage of people who were newly housed and people sustained in housing by race and ethnicity. So in fiscal year 24, HSD supported a total of about 3,300 community members newly housed in rapid rehousing programs and about 1,800 community members who were sustained in housing through rapid rehousing programs. Next slide, please. So as Emily noted earlier, one of the goals of our department is to ensure we are serving Black, Indigenous, and people of color at or above the rates they are experiencing homelessness. And this is in order to reduce disparities. So as you can see, the green lines are, most of them are longer than the yellow line. And so what that means in this slide, it highlights that rapid rehousing programs are, for the most part, serving people of color at a meaningfully higher rate than they are experiencing homelessness. There is an exception here with American Indian, Alaska Native, and Indigenous folks. You'll see a slight difference of about 0.1, and that's an area we will continue to focus on. Okay, next slide. This is our strategic goals and outcomes slides for this division. Two primary areas around, the first will be around connecting people across all homeless services systems with permanent housing through various rapid rehousing programs. And then that second goal we've talked a lot about throughout our division, throughout our department presentation, but specific with this division as well. We have a goal to ensure we are serving priority populations at or above the rates they are experiencing homelessness with this type of housing strategy. So, and we noted in the previous slides where we are with these goals. So I'm going to move us forward to the next slide. All right, this is a big one. Okay, I'm going to spend some time here. So this slide shows people newly housed, that's on the left, and people sustained in housing, and that's on the right, through rapid rehousing strategies over fiscal years. This is where Anna had flagged earlier that we are combining our system reports with our budgeted offers. So the green bars are outcomes of people served in previous fiscal years across the whole system. So that includes HUD-funded rapid rehousing programs. As noted, our department program offers do not include these HUD outcomes. So we wanted to add those projections in so the totals are more comparable across those fiscal years. So if you look in FY 25 and 26, those bars, you will see those both included. So you will see those projections based on our department budget and the estimates from HUD-funded programs that are not found within our budget. We'll probably have questions here, but another piece of this slide that I wanted to highlight just quickly, for people newly placed into housing, there is a decline between fiscal years 24 and 25. For fiscal year 24, it was higher due to those special initiatives at that state and local level. The decrease in 25 is related to that, and then in 26, we had a small reduction in this division, thus new placements went down. And then on the right, for people sustained into housing, we see a big jump in those served. And this is partially due to sustaining those FY24 special initiative households, and also partially us getting a better understanding of the sustained data that we now have a new way to measure. Okay, I'm going to move us on to the next slide.
Yeah, just one question.
Oh,
Is it possible to see these numbers disaggregated by the districts, like District 3 and District 4? Is that possible?
I wish that it was, but so we don't, it is not, unfortunately. This is one area that we're challenged, and I know that we hear a lot from our East County partners about this. When a housing placement is entered into HMIS, we do not require that they enter the full address of that placement into the HMIS system, so we don't have complete geographic data about where folks are placed. That being said, and again, where they're coming from, it's not something we are able to collect routinely at this moment. So for example, if somebody is working with the case manager, they're not required to enter like I sleep in this part of the city, for example. But what we're working on to solve one aspect of this is I mentioned that new outreach tool that will help us collect data in the field. That tool will be GIS enabled, so it will collect location on where that outreach is happening, and then we will be able to collect that. So that's a future goal.
Got it. Great.
I want to move us to the next. Oh, do you have a question?
Do we ask, or if they can answer, what was their last known address?
It's not collected systematically in that way.
All right, let's move on to the next slide. So this slide shows retention data by race and ethnicity. And so in fiscal year 24, there was a 90% retention rate for all rapid rehousing participants. I'm going to move us to the next and last slide. All right, so maybe the title is not correct, but I'm going to just name, here is a number of the chair's executive budget restorations or Yeah, maybe I'm not.
I mean,
Okay, so
it's
there
right
are
for your
four-
context.
You know, there are 4 areas here that we wanted to mention. The outcomes are up above, but I'll just start briefly with employment services. So those are services that are focused on creating those low barrier employment opportunities. Also, it provides individuals and families with employment services, rental assistance, and eviction prevention support. Then we have our placement out of shelter services. Those investments focus on increasing permanent housing placements for individuals and families in emergency shelters. And so that'll combine rent assistance and case management services. The third category is eviction prevention. That is focused on the distribution of emergency rental assistance through primarily culturally specific community-based organizations. And then lastly, we have the Ticket Home program, and that diverts individuals from street and shelter through one-time transportation assistance. So that is the end of the Housing Placement and Retention Division. I'll pause to see if we have any questions, and then we can move on to the last division.
I do have a question.
Yes.
In programs that are using vouchers versus brick and mortar, are we experiencing difficulty finding units? I'm, as a policy question, I'm wondering how much more placements using vouchers we can really make versus do we need to invest in owning, building. I'm not sure what the right answer is.
What
but
we've
no.
heard, at least from our providers, is when there is a voucher versus RRH, or rapid rehousing dollars, it typically is a little bit more challenging. Vouchers will go in, it's a little bit easier when a household has attached to a voucher. But that's all, that's what we're hearing from our providers around the differences. And so when you speak about vouchers, it's usually in our more long-term rental assistance programs versus this is focused really on that short term. And it's a little bit more challenging.
Okay.
I don't know.
If I could jump in here, there's a lot of data on this actually, and the retention rates are higher in vouchers than they are in project-based. There is difficulty, of course, in finding placements, but when it's project-based, it's also challenging. If somebody does need to be relocated, they lose that voucher or they lose that subsidy, and so that can be a challenge. So I think it's something that we need to keep an eye on and having the right balance. When we talk about PSH, that's more where that shows up, but I do just want to acknowledge that from experience of doing it and looking at the data, it's split in the utility, and I think that's why there's been a nice balanced approach.
That's a perfect segue into our supportive housing division, if we can. All right, let's do it. Well, next slide, please. Oh, I apologize. I'm sorry. We were going there.
Your mic.
So I'm going back to the slide 59 with it's got the 3 definitions of placed, sustained, and retained. And so one thing that I've been sort of ongoing concern is the sustainability of sustained versus retained. And just thinking of when we met with our legislative delegation, somebody who has a very powerful role with the Ways and Means said they weren't going to be paying sort of like an ongoing basis, like rent assistance, people like with no end. And I know that permanent supportive housing has that, but it also is I think a message like that the state's not going to fund that. And we also, because we have other needs. So based on that, so if retained is that somebody is previously in a housing program but no longer receiving assistance, like it's a measure of success, and that financial commitment has ended. And so I was curious then, in that context, the slides on 60 had both data on newly housed and sustained, but not on retained. And the same thing on slide 63, again, sort of the newly housed and sustained, but not retained. And from a longer term framework, I'm interested in like always looking at those 3 data sets together. And then also
Slide 64 has the retention data.
it's presented in
No,
like,
slide 64, yeah. So
it's
that is,
presented like in a different way. So I guess I'm looking at like comparisons.
so you would want to see retention across time. We can send that, yeah.
And I also would like to know kind of what, I'd like to know what our goals are in each of those. So, do we have some really specific goals of we're going to, because you hear anecdotally of people, they get sustained support and then there's no gentle off ramp and they like go off the cliff. And so how is it that we're thinking about how we move most people from sustained to retained versus them staying in that category when actually we don't have the resources longer term? Or maybe they're not even, they're not in the category of they should be receiving permanent supportive housing. So just thinking more clearly about like how we think about those goals and then what are the supports to transition people in a more intentional, like,
I mean, I was going to say it from a case management perspective of like, when you see, if we say up to 24 months as an example, it doesn't necessarily mean that the amount of rent subsidy you pay is at that full amount the whole 24 months. So at the end of, let's just say in the second year of work, you're working individually with that client to be able to understand, did they just get a job? Did they go into school? What is it that how much can they start to put into their rent amount and how much rent subsidy then do they need? So some of that transition occurs in that sustained area as well, outside of retention. I do think we might want to clarify retention and how that's measured in supportive housing, because that'll look different, because that's a long-term rental subsidy. So how we measure that looks different than this division.
Yeah, so
and I think, I'm just to respond to that, so I really appreciate that. And I think we have to be, sort of make transparent what that looks like, because otherwise it's like, oh, it's 24 months and then there's this cliff. But I also think if you're not clear, like there is going to be, we're expecting there to be a ramp down because we're not seeing that you're going into permanent supportive housing. I think clarity is kindness. And so having that, being really clear of like, here's how we're transitioning and here was what our goals are. Because I think when you lay that out, it does tend to incentivize people to, okay, I got to have a strategy. What supports do I need to move from this stage to this status to this other status?
Couple things. So yeah, so this is, this slide shows you retention for rapid rehousing, and that is measured as of end of subsidy. Our dashboard shows it at 6 months, 12 months, and 24 months, and you can look at it across time. But we can show you kind of what that trend looks like over time for rapid rehousing. For permanent supportive housing, it's not post-subsidy because the concept is folks would stay. So it is just really how long are they being retained. I do want to note on the question of like getting better at looking at what does that off-ramp look and how to make that off-ramp successful. We are starting up a rapid rehousing evaluation that we've talked about at previous board meetings. And part of that goal is to dig into those questions is what does a successful rapid rehousing program look like, including making sure that person is sustained once that subsidy ends. And I've heard questions about like what sort of like the ideal length of assistance. And I don't know, part of the best aspect of rapid rehousing is that it is flexible. There probably is no ideal length of assistance because every situation is different, but being designed to have that flexible off-ramp depending on that household's needs, I do think we can do a better job of articulating sort of it's going to be specific, but what are the essential elements? So I think that that is what our rapid rehousing evaluation, is designed to help us get at.
And I would add, I think this is why the employment investments are critical, because people need opportunities to increase their income if they're going to come off a subsidy. And I will say most providers are starting from that place. So it's to Commissioner Brim-Edwards' point, it's about telling that story of what's actually already happening on the ground, because it is from the front end, constant conversation about the length of subsidy or rent assistance people will receive.
And I think it's important that we communicate that with the community and to like also the stakeholders who are, whether it's the state or, the voters, that is sort of built into it. Speaking of employment, on slide 65, the chair's executive budget restorations, or her actually proposed budget, on the employment one, which is the first one, that it says that 200 individuals receiving employment services and supports, and then 200 employment placements. So this is something that's super important in East Portland, and I'm wondering what specifically was restored. Or in the proposed budget.
We're pulling it up, 1 second. And we did provide, each of the offices got a more detailed list from us as well, but we will say publicly what that is.
I would love to get it on the record. Yeah, thank you.
We just like to make sure we're not saying the wrong thing, so I'll find it.
I have
I got it right here.
That's
So
a
it was-
good premise.
I was going to use this answer. So it was the mobile shower and hygiene response and the workforce cleaning brigade, as well as some employment rent assistance with Work Systems Inc. Those were the things that were restored in the budget.
Thank you.
I mean, good, but there are other things I like too. Okay, are you,
Go ahead, that was my question.
to what degree are we coordinating with those who qualify for vocational rehabilitation through the state?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
To what degree are we coordinating with individuals who would qualify for vocational rehabilitation through the state?
I'm not sure.
I am not sure.
Okay, I would love,
Since it's going through service providers, we're not sure how
Yeah.
they are doing that, but if the question is on a more systemic.
Like for the Work Systems Inc. money or something, I wonder if
Well-
it's connected. But we don't know. I don't know.
okay, we should look into that because I think a significant number of individuals may qualify. And I just think employment services are incredibly important. I totally know we're in a very difficult position in making decisions, but let's take advantage because, that is state and federally funded. And so I'd love to get that into the mix of services we can connect people with.
It definitely happens at the provider level. I think I will just share with the board, a number of us have talked about employment services. I know it's critical to people, and I will be sharing with you a budget amendment to add back additional employment services for the Homeless Services Department budget.
And I don't know exactly what your amendment is, but I'm interested in the same thing. I'm assuming we're sort of on the same wavelength, so looking forward to that conversation.
All right, let's move on to the last division of our department, supportive housing. So supportive housing can take the form of both permanent supportive housing and recovery-oriented transitional housing. So permanent supportive housing, or PSH, is a type of deeply affordable permanent housing that provides support services to individuals with significant disabilities, including chronic health conditions and behavioral health needs. So PSH is designed for those who have experienced or at risk of long-term or cyclical homelessness and have extremely low income. It combines long-term rent assistance with ongoing wraparound support services. PSH can be provided, so Commissioner Singleton was talking about this slightly, that PSH can be provided in site-based buildings, and so that means that there's a dedicated PSH unit within a single building, and that's often referred to as project-based PSH. PSH can also be offered scattered across multiple sites and follows the client. So that's often referred to as tenant-based PSH. Let's move on to the next slide. One of the key strategies developed to achieve the goals of the Supportive Housing Services Program was a regional long-term rent assistance program known as RLRA or ARLA. So RLRA is one of the ways that you can provide people with the rent assistance component of permanent supportive housing. ARLA is flexible, long-term rent subsidy that is available for as long as the household needs with no predetermined end date. These programs help people not only get into housing, but stay there with wraparound services. So this slide highlights New Narratives RLRA PSH program, which focuses on serving households with significant behavioral health needs. It is a wonderful story of an RLRA participant, and as Velda so eloquently states, I didn't know my rental payments would last for years to come. I am so thankful. Next slide, please. So this slide highlights our supportive housing division's operating budget and staffing across this year and next year. In fiscal year 26, there is a $65 million investment in supportive housing programming, and the primary change is in FY26 is the reduction of supportive housing services funding. Next slide. So this slide highlights demographics of people served in supportive housing, specifically the specifically the percentage of people who were newly housed and people sustained in housing by race and ethnicity. So in fiscal year 24, about 1,100 community members were newly housed through supportive housing options, and 33 community members sustained in supportive housing opportunities. Next slide. My favorite slide, this is new. This is a map that illustrates HSD-funded PSH projects that are in operation and currently in development across the entire county. It's important to note that this map only represents project-based PSH units. And for context, about 40% of our PSH units supported by HSD are project-based, and the other remaining 60% are tenant-based. Next slide. Over the next 3 slides, we're going to cover our supportive housing division's strategic goals and outcomes. So one of our first goals is to support a continuum of supportive housing services. We've done this by implementing increased standards for per household services funding. So that's that service cap from $10,000 per household to $15,000 per household as a base, with a premium of up to $17,500 for family PSH, culturally specific PSH, and buildings with 25% or more of units of PSH. So I'm talking about the services funding that is a component of PSH. Second goal we have here is adding supportive housing units to meet our county's SHS LIP commitment of adding at least 2,235 PSH opportunities to our community. Next slide. Our third goal is to support ongoing federal funding to homeless service providers via our continuum of care leadership. And on the next slide is our last goal in this division, which is to ensure PSH services are serving our priority populations at or above the rate they experience homelessness. All right, let's look at service trends on the next slide. All right, so these are PSH service trends by year. So this slide shows people newly housed and people sustained in housing through PSH strategies by fiscal years. As a reminder, I said it earlier, but I want to just say it again because the slide gets complicated. As a reminder, we are combining system reports with our budgeted offers. So those green bars are outcomes of people served in previous fiscal years across the whole system, and that includes our HUD-funded PSH programs. So in fiscal year 25 and 26 bars, you will see both of those included. So the projections based on our department budget and estimates from HUD-funded PSH programs that are not within our HSD budget. Another nuance about this slide, I'm going to go over to the people sustained, that fourth column over, our fiscal year 25. Here is where you can see also that our fiscal year 25 estimates were off with people sustained in PSH. When we submitted the 25 performance measures in February, we underestimated the households sustained in supportive housing. We now know that we will sustain more people, and thus we projected an additional 1,200 people sustained in PSH with FY26 investments. So that's that darker blue bar right there. We might have questions. I could finish the last 2 slides. Okay, let's go to last 2 slides.
I have a question about the mix of rental payment versus support services for people in permanent supported housing. You don't need to give this to me now, but can I get a sense of like how much is rental? Yeah, how much is for the rent and how much is for the wraparound services and all of that?
Yep.
The second question I have is, are we or a partner specifically working with our permanent supported housing consumers on SSI eligibility in order to help subsidize at least the housing portion. And then again, depending on how much of it is rent, how much would that be able to help for the rental portion? Because, I'm looking at, if we brought in the Medicaid dollar for some of the services, if we targeted a lot of Social Security eligibility for some of the rental dollars, then what is the SHS dollar that would need to go into for a full package versus now, what are we paying? Does that make sense? Okay.
And that's absolutely something that we do and that our providers are doing, especially with SSI. And we have a lot of folks, even from the start, that may have that. And so that rental subsidy portion will look different. And to your point, oh, did you? Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought I heard. Oh, sorry, I thought I heard. And also just with Medicaid eligible expenses, with the support services side, we definitely have some programs that we could speak to, or I could follow up with our behavioral health division. We have some investments there with PSH that we're kind of working towards that leveraging opportunity as well. Great.
Can I jump in on this? Great answer, Kanoy, and I just want to lift up what you're saying. This has been one of my hopes, and I still hold out hope that Metro can help us with a regional approach to long-term supportive housing strategies. One of them is how do we maximize federal dollars? How do we maximize other income sources? I think that's essentially what you're getting to. And what are models that promote that? Because obviously every dollar of SSI allows us to deploy the next dollar of SHS somewhere else in service of a different resident. So that clearly is happening at the individual level, as Kanoy described. I would love to see us lift up and have a strategic community-wide discussion around what are our expectations around how SSI is deployed at the system level so that we're not leaving it to individual providers to navigate that and to figure out, oh, this person just got SSI, now there's some extra money, and how do we move that around?
Yeah, I think a great example of like, if you have that level of intentionality, it can actually move the needle is the work that has been done with veterans over the last 15 years and how we have actually significantly moved the needle on the number of houseless veterans. And so it's not the same process. It is harder for sure. I don't expect it to be overnight, but I think that there is a tremendous potential to allow our dollar to serve more people if we're able to do that.
And again, we're in radical agreement. This is so perfect for a regional approach. SSI is obviously a federal program. Other sources of money are going to be either federal or state. It's something that all 3 counties need to solve and address. PSH is the core of the SHS program. We'll defer to Commissioner Singleton, but I think this is what people envisioned at its core when they passed that tax. And so how are we really optimizing SHS dollars in the PSH space? Again, I would argue at the individual provider level, I think that's happening on a one-off basis. It's not, to my understanding, yet happening at the system level.
We have 2 more slides in this division. Oops, sorry, Commissioner Singleton.
That's okay. This is one I think that relates to the billing hub concept, Commissioner Moyer, that you and I have chatted a little bit about, because I think the providers who are currently leveraging Medicaid in behavioral health are those who are already Medicaid billers. And I think you and I both have designs on getting other providers ability to do that and leverage those funds. I do also want to note that we were able to address ending veteran homelessness because we received from the federal government almost the exact number of vouchers as the number of homeless veterans we had at the time, and we continue to see increases there. So it has never been a local source or even leveraging VA benefits that led to that. We have got to continue to think about a federal strategy on the need to address the lack of public housing. I know that we don't have magic to do that right now, but I don't want us to lose sight of that.
All right, let's move on to the next slide. So this is our retention data. So this slide shows retention data by race and ethnicity. In fiscal year '24, you'll see that there is a 92% retention rate for all supportive housing participants. Next and last slide in this division. All right, so as we've already mentioned a number of times, but especially in this division, one of our strategic goals is to ensure we are serving BIPOC folks at or above the rates they're experiencing homelessness. This slide highlights where we are achieving that goal and where there are gaps in serving priority populations through supportive housing strategies. I thought one thing we wanted to note and mention is that over the last year, HSD has made progress around serving and retaining Black, African American, and African households in particular, and is in large part because of significant investments in culturally specific PSH projects. And that is all I have at this slide. We can move on to the next slide or answer more questions.
Any last questions before we move on to other departments? Okay, thank you.
The rear, we've made good time. I'm really glad to try and bring us home here and then turn it over to you. So we're going to talk about SHS-funded programs in other departments. I'm going to look up at the video. Hopefully we can get Commissioner Singleton up there at some point. I know this is a particular interest of hers. I will say that one of the things the chair did in '23 is really ask us to take a one county approach, including with SHS funds. And when you think about it, really, probably every county in this country is organized a little bit differently in terms of how it breaks out its departments and services. And so Multnomah County's approach, where we have a homeless services department, we also have DCHS and other departments, you know, in some respects, it's somewhat arbitrary. So for me, the question is less, does HSD control every dollar, and more about how is the county deploying these dollars effectively and in a focused way across county departments. And if I'm reading the room correctly, I think that's where this discussion needs to land. We need to understand how these dollars are flowing to other departments and what they're being used for. In the current budget, we have about $30.3 million proposed for other county departments. And I want to just make a structural note here. We're going to start on slide 78, and unfortunately, the presentation is kind of split across two sections. In the appendix, slides 96 through 101 really need to be paired with 78 through 83. And if you actually almost lay them side by side, you will see that they're very complementary to each other. And I apologize, we couldn't figure out how to get that all on one slide. But what those show you is the program offer, the department, the amount of money, and the program and the expected outcome. So as I know you'll have a discussion about this in your work session. Again, I think several of you have some ideas about how these funds should be tweaked a little bit. I think you can do that most effectively by putting those slides next to each other. The other thing that's unique here is I don't want to overstep. I do want to let other departments in their budget presentations, ultimately they're accountable for these dollars in partnership with our department, but I want them to be able to speak to your questions about how did you use those dollars? What outcomes did you get? Were you effective? So I thought what I could do here, and I'll probably go through it pretty quickly so we can turn this back over to you for discussion, is just remind you, and probably more importantly, the folks listening, really how these dollars are deployed across the county for different purposes that really don't reside in the Homeless Services Department, but are the right thing for the SHS dollars. So slide 78, you can see we've got a couple of different programs, including bolstering our critical severe weather shelter capacity to as many as 1,300 beds for up to 12 nights. I think this past year, we re-energized the partnership with the City of Portland, and I think we did a good job of quickly pivoting, including with some of those city overnight shelter beds. So that was nice to bring those online and turn those into 24-hour beds for the severe weather. And that was made possible in part by funding through this department. Slide 79, we're making strategic investments in specialized outreach and support. And these are directly improving our outcomes for people experiencing homelessness. For example, you can see the ADVSD mobile outreach team successfully connected 91 people in shelters and encampments with long-term Medicaid housing this year. We hope that will grow Furthermore, we've strengthened domestic violence services at a key entry point, and we added the capacity to complete 400 coordinated access assessments. And again, I'm just trying to, for purposes of today, just give you a flavor of how we're using these dollars. Slide 80, focus on families with children experiencing unsheltered homelessness, and our partnership with the Youth and Family Services Department, or Division, excuse me, implements a dual strategy that prevents displacement through eviction prevention resources and offering sustained housing stability via the 150 RLRA vouchers for formerly homeless families. So the twist here is that's being administered through YFS. 81 slide, we highlight our partnership with the Behavioral Health Division, offering a vital integrated service approach for individuals with complex needs. The SHS-funded programming has an annual impact of supporting approximately 290 individuals in shelter, 230 in transitional housing, and 270 households in permanent supportive housing. And again, I invite you to ask, in this case, the Behavioral Health Division, how they're integrating these dollars into their programs more broadly.
Can I ask what behavioral health crisis services is? Program offer 40069.
We'll throw that up. Slide 80, and what's the?
Behavioral health crisis services.
We will have to get back to you on that. That's not, unless that's ringing a bell down there.
I think these are good.
Yeah, come on up. Lifeline.
If you have an answer, come on down.
Hey, good morning. I think it's on. Can you hear me? Okay, good morning. Jessica Jacobson, she, her pronouns, interim deputy director of Behavioral Health Division. I believe that program offer has our behavioral health shelter in reach team included, and also our Old Town InReach program. And there's several things in there. So we would have to pull that up for if there's specific additional questions, but.
Okay, thank you.
And Jessica, don't leave. I think we've got a little bit on the next slide, slide 82. We have the BHRC serving 100 people a day, building referral pathways from shelter, and some other services as well, including Do Good Multnomah's housing programs, and the idea of connecting people in day services to housing. And there's a DCJ program. I believe we're on slide 82. DCJ program designed to address the housing barriers facing individuals reentering the community. And so through DCJ, we have funded also PSH and RLRA vouchers. And we are also funding the Stabilization and Readiness Day Center that served, I think, about 200 individuals that were justice and mental health system involved. And the last investment is on slide 83. Financial oversight and monitoring is a requirement of our IGA with Metro, so we're funding that here with those SHS dollars. I would just close by saying, ultimately, I think strategically aligning these programs across department allows us to, in a more targeted way, address the LIP and the HRAP goals by leveraging the expertise and the existing programs in those other departments. So I think proud of the work we're doing. I know this board wants to talk about how some of those dollars are flowing and what they're used for, but I think we're headed in the right direction with the way we're leveraging the strengths and skills and programs in those other departments. We have just 2 more slides, and then we're done, which is great.
While we're moving to that second area, Commissioner Moyer, the program offer that was listed there is actually like a very big program offer, and so the SHS funding is just a part of that. So just so you can, I'm sure you'll look it up later, but just.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sure. Okay, slide 85. This goes back to something Commissioner Moyer raised, I don't know, 70 slides ago. But we hung on to it. We don't forget. This is our latest understanding of the governor's recommended budget from our GR folks. I don't know if they're here today, but if you have deep dive questions, I'll let them respond to that. But you can see how we've budgeted for sort of what we call our historical share down there, the little footnote, 20%. You can see how those dollars play out both on a biannual and an annual basis into our budget, and those were reflected in the budget slides that Antoinette presented earlier. The official ask we have on the table for the state would be in addition to these dollars.
And I'm going to speak to some of those asks at the end of the presentation today. So
Great. Okay. Last slide, we always like to close with what are some of the variables that we encourage all of you to be thinking about. None of these are new, but I just want to highlight these publicly. The work at Metro continues. We're coming up on 2 years of discussions about changing the SHS measure. And I think that has continued to create a little bit of uncertainty. We are sort of supporting you and regional leadership in having those discussions. Our focus is on managing those dollars month to month and fiscal year to fiscal year. And we've certainly had a lot of discussions with you about the uncertainty around the SHS revenues and how those have impacted the work. And the split between ongoing and one-time only, that's been our focus. And we think we've landed us in a good spot on that, but there is continued uncertainty ahead. And as we are making budget decisions, we have to acknowledge that. The other two things, which are a little bit related, I'm very nervous about the financial stability of many of our nonprofits. And so any changes in HUD dollars, any change in their ability to contract with the federal government due to requirements related to contract language around DEI. Emily and I in particular daily field questions and concerns. We've had nonprofits approach us and they're concerned about losing their nonprofit status. And so this is just, again, something we need to be aware of. The chair, the COO have convened a countywide work group to understand and track on a weekly basis the changes in federal contracting policy. And I really commend that as being extremely helpful to us in the Homeless Services Department. But the unpredictability that that has created for our providers cannot be overstated, unfortunately.
Thank you. And that is, I think they're meeting every other week, just to be clear, but it is, I mean, it obviously is affecting housing. It's affecting the work that your organization does and our ability to engage and partner with what's happening at the federal level in a really big way. And obviously so many of our other departments. So, okay.
And by the way, and we have tried to be really clear not to set any expectations, but one of the first things we heard from our providers was, how will the county backfill us for any lost federal dollars? And that's not an option. I don't blame them for asking, but they're concerned about their own budget holes that would occur if they have to give up federal dollars.
Thank you. So I think the rest of the presentation is appendices. So are there any final questions from the board on what we've heard in this last session?
So I would like to just highlight, and I have some follow-up for each of the departments. I have asked other departments to share data about which population is being served. Population A, which is folks who are chronically homeless, meaning long-term homelessness plus disabling condition. Population B, which is a little more of that kind of retention, prevention focus of the dollars to understand how that mix is showing up in these different investments. I've asked about specific housing related outcomes and how those are impacted by these funds. So I just wanted to appreciate DCHS, the health department, DCJ for being responsive to those requests. It has led me to some further questions. Some of these programs frankly feel pretty FTE heavy. One program has a 6 FTE with 15 PSH units, so I have more questions about that. That's a very high staff to client ratio. So I just wanted to uplift that because this is the first time we've been able to talk about it in a public work session, but I will be proposing some shifts in funds to bring some SHS back to the Homeless Services Department, where some programs may be great, but if they're not meeting some of our goals around SHS, I think we should consider funding them with general fund as opposed to SHS dollars, so we can really focus that specific resource on our on our folks who are chronically homeless in this community.
And that's the same scrutiny we would expect of programs in our own department. So I don't know what your proposed changes are, but that level of engagement and scrutiny is totally appropriate and welcome.
This isn't.
And I shouldn't leave you all off. You all have been very responsive as well. We just have had meetings, so I apologize. Homeless Services Department has also provided a lot of this data too.
This isn't a question, but it's sort of a follow-up to the earlier comment about the community sheltering strategy. And this is maybe a sort of a commission sort of thought to put out there that we have a sort of reset with the city about what that looks like, so that we're not talking about like one piece of the broader strategy and measuring that in terms of our success, or that is like the sole way that we're going to reach our overall goals. And so I would just hope that we'd have that conversation maybe before we have our meeting next Friday with the city. Again, sort of do a little bit of a reset, so maybe I could share around it as sort of draft of what that might look like. Again, I think it's more a reframing. It's not doing anything differently, but just reframing it versus, because that was all set up as part of the IGA. And again, it was also contemplated that we'd be taking back some of the sheltering units that the county had, and also it didn't contemplate some of the pass-through money that's going to go straight to the city. So again, it's more of a reframing versus doing anything differently, but I think it's important that we have a common understanding with the city of Portland and our other cities about what that exactly looks like and how it fits with our bigger strategy.
Can I just comment? We would absolutely welcome that. If you think about it, since we adopted that very specific community shelter strategy, which had down to the bed, allocated among different systems, everything has changed. Political leadership has changed, financial situation has changed. As you noted, the operational plans have changed, so everything has changed. I don't want us to sort of stick to this plan that may in fact need to be more flexible and maybe updated or reframed. So we'd like to be included in that, and we would support us taking a fresh look at that.
And that's fundamentally changed is, I'm just looking at Anna because she was the sort of master of sort of the formatting this large document, but even the goal was 50% of the unsheltered, which we didn't even have what the number was because we didn't have the data of the inflow and the outflow. And so there's been some really fundamental shifts. So again, I think we should sort of, it's a little bit of a reset and a reframe to more accurately reflect our current goals and the data and the relationship and how we're going to deliver on the overall goals.
And obviously, we would love to do that on our own, but that was adopted by the city and the county, and it needs to be a leadership discussion, not a department decision. So I appreciate there seems to be some interest in pursuing that.
To piggyback, because I totally agree with that, I'm really interested in revisiting a specific part of the HRAP, which I have spoken about previously, and I'm not really sure how to. I've asked about this, but I find the behavioral health portion of the HRAP to be profoundly offensive to people with mental illness, that it is solely recommending involuntary options is profoundly offensive, and in fact does not address homelessness in any way. But I actually believe having a really good behavioral health, both looking at substance use disorder and mental illness, and to be quite honest, the confluence of both, because I think we need to be more realistic about the interplay between the two, that you really cannot and should not separate them into other camps, because there's a significant overlap, particularly with people with severe mental illness that have a very high, and who are experiencing homelessness, have a very high likelihood of a co-occurring substance use disorder. I want to lean in to that work because I think it's one of the areas that we are struggling to meet that need. And it really does require us to coordinate with other departments and service entities to get the full wraparound. So, I plug to the degree that we revisit HRAP, doing that work. I strongly support Multnomah County revisioning that work because I am not supportive of the HRAP approach. And then, I think we also need to potentially look at some other subcategories for maybe a targeted or different outreach. I have had conversations with the mayor about my concerns of having a housing strategy that is congregate shelter heavy, and what is the alternative for people that would not be an appropriate place. And we have to answer that question, because I'm sure it's not just my district is very concerned about this population. And I am worried that if all we are offering is congregate shelters and it is not appropriate for groups of people, we will not move the needle for those communities. So I'm not exactly sure what the right process is, but I really would like us to bring that topic back up and reimagine that. I'm also very interested in transition age youth, particularly those coming out of foster care, and wanting to partner with the state, who is currently in a settlement agreement because of their lack of support for people transitioning out of foster care. And I'd love to see them partner with us to better support those youth. And I'm sure there are many other groups that we could think about who needs to be part of the solution.
The Homeless Services Department, Emily, and the Homeless Response System, Robin Johnson, sitting back there in the audience, just completed a very targeted set of discussions with culturally specific leaders, Black leaders in particular, around what their shelter and housing needs are and how we are not meeting them. So I think I'd be comfortable committing to our team, certainly engaging in a focused discussion with the appropriate leaders in the mental health and disability community to understand from them, what is it we're doing that's not meeting your needs, and what would you bring forward? We actually have two very good proposals from culturally specific providers that in part were brought forward as a result to us engaging them directly on behalf of the county. So I don't know what that looks like, but we, Jillian and I and the team can figure out how we might structure those discussions with your help.
Yeah, and I think the behavioral health needs, or the health needs in general, is really why we set up the HRS and have the HRAP, because of that. Like it's outside what the Homeless Services Department is able to engage and act on. And so we need the partners there, and we need to have that conversation. I will say, for instance, the BHRC and the beds that are at the BHRC were specifically designed for people who were not able to be successful in other shelter settings. And so we've tried to make inroads in that, but it is definitely, we know the needs, both from acuity and the number of people having that is larger than what we're able to do right now. So I welcome that conversation. I'm going to ask,
Chair, I had one.
please go
I
ahead.
just, so I wanted to, I think, I'm really excited to hear that people want to have more conversation about HRAP. And I think there's a lot of components that we could really do with an update and some refreshing, not just based on the data, but based on, frankly, the opinions and perspectives and policy priorities of this new board and the new city council. I also do want to clarify that the HRAP, PSH is serving the population that Commissioner Moyer is talking about. There are additional than the secure residential. That doesn't mean that it's adequate, but I do want to make sure folks are aware that a lot of people with severe and persistent mental illness are being served in our PSH programs. That's what they're designed to do, and what their evidence-based practice for is. Most of the research around Housing First is specifically for that population. Again, I think we leave a lot of Medicaid dollars on the table. Some of the very successful programs include explicit Medicaid billing. I've seen models where hospitals have actually developed their own housing and put the dollars into the capital because of the need and the cost savings they saw. So I think there's a lot of models that are untapped that we can continue to explore. And I want to just, I hope that there's space to talk about this at the next city county joint session. And I know that they can be difficult to coordinate, but there's so much for us to talk about, and 3 minutes a person is just not going to get us there. So I really look forward to hearing about how that will be structured so that we all understand what we can bring into that conversation, excuse me, and how we can have a little bit more discussion like we're having today.
Before we end with this panel, I know that Commissioner Singleton indicated that she might have an amendment related to employment, and I know I've had a discussion with Commissioner Jones-Dixon. So depending on what Commissioner Singleton's amendment may be, I might have one as well, or it could just be I'm in support of the proposal, but it's an area just looking at the budget that I have a particular interest in and want to focus on. So just want to flag that for the future.
Thank you. So if there aren't any other questions for HSD on the presentation so far, I think so I want to note, Christian has been taking copious notes during this on all of the follow-ups on the different specific things on slides or things that weren't on slides that there were questions about. So we are planning to have the Homeless Services Department come back on the 21st to respond to those questions. So they'll be working on those. So if there's anything else, please work to get, if you think of more questions, please get them to Christian so she can make sure that they get to the department and the department has time to respond to those. I did want to take a couple minutes to talk about two things real quick. One is what is included in the asks that the city and the county jointly are going to the state legislature about helping us fill some of the gaps that we have because of the change in revenue forecast for SHS and the difference in general fund deficits as well for both the city and the county. So there are two components of the ask that we have for the state. The first is around shelter beds. And what we're asking for is about $18 million from the state for shelter beds. That funding is going to serve hundreds of individuals by sustaining 115 alternative shelter pods and expanding with 360 overnight shelter beds for adults. That will include 100 24/7 shelter beds for adults and families and day center services serving about 150 people a day. And that is going to be, that $18 million is combined between a portion which will go to the city of Portland for some of the work that they're doing and leading on, and a part that will stay here to help supplement some of the cuts that we had to make in this proposed budget. The second area of service that is kind of a combo of the ask from the legislature is around housing placements and the wraparound support services. So to help people effectively exit homelessness, additional services beyond shelters, we all know this, are needed for housing placements and supportive services to meet growing acuity. So the investments that we're asking the legislators for will sustain services that will result in housing at least 175 individuals through rent assistance vouchers for permanent supportive housing units. So this is part of that growth of PHS units that we were not able to do this year because of budget deficits that we really know is important, and we want to continue. And so we're asking for the state's assistance on that. Transitioning a minimum of 110 people from emergency shelter directly into stable housing. This is about the resources we have for flow through, for rental assistance, for the other supports to help people move from shelter into housing. And then delivering wraparound support services, including case management, behavioral health care, substance use treatment, and employment services that help people stay housed. And so the ask around that is it's about a little less than $6.9 million for that body of work. So as I hear a lot, from this board, like a lot of interest in the employment services and helping to make that whole. I know it's important. That's why I did a partial restoration from what the department had proposed. But there are, as we're looking at the continuum and how do we adequately fund the different parts of our spectrum of services, that's really what has gone into the ask of looking not, at not just shelter, but also, the additional dollars needed to help move people from shelter into housing, helping to create those additional permanent supportive housing beds, and then investing in those wraparound services, including employment services, but also behavioral health care and some of these other things that we know people need to be successful. So, the governor and the mayor and I had a phone call with the Portland legislative delegation early Monday morning to talk about this. I will be going down to Salem on Monday to talk about this. We know we had a revenue forecast for the state today that was down several $100 million. So we're going to need to really, I think all of us stress the importance of this to our ability to serve people here in Portland and Multnomah County and be able to really make this county the vibrant place that it needs to be in order to sustain the economic engine of our state overall.
We have a commission letter, I think, supporting the ask as well, correct?
Yes, that is being worked on. Yes, so I appreciate everyone's support around that too. Okay, so I think that there's a one-pager that outlines those asks that has been sent around, but if not, we'll make sure that it gets out to everyone on the board. The other piece that I wanted to make sure was that we have daylighted was a conversation that I've had, I think, with each of you offline, but wanted to make sure that it was something that I was sharing publicly too, about the further work that's being done around guidelines from the Homeless Services Department on distributing gear and supplies. So my office, in collaboration with the Homeless Services Department and many key stakeholders, has put together a new administrative role to replace the interim supply distribution guidelines implemented by the Homeless Service Department in October of 24. So in the interim guidelines, we outlined a process for next steps, which we have been working through. We said that there was going to be, that we would have a formal review of this policy occur no later than April 25, following the winter severe weather season, and that we would have discussions with many key stakeholders in this work, including the board. And so that work has happened. There's been several different conversations at different levels around that. The proposed policy, or the policy, is going to be reviewed again in December 24 in tandem with increased shelter capacity. So I want to make sure that we know that everyone hears that this isn't the end of the conversation, but this is something that we will be actively reviewing. But the new rule, as revised, further limits the distribution of certain county purchased gear, including direct distribution of tents, only during severe weather events. Year-round, the county is going to continue to distribute hygiene kits, basic first aid supplies, water, clothing, sleeping bags, and blankets to people who are living unsheltered. Individual outreach providers will retain the ability to obtain and distribute tents on their own if they choose, just as they were able to do before the pandemic. But providers will make those decisions about using county funds to do that based on the unavailability of an appropriate shelter bed and or a particular person's specific health needs. I want to, really make clear that our goal is to make sure that people in our community are safe and housed. And as we build more shelter beds and place more people in housing, our need to hand out supplies to help people survive will decrease. And that's a good thing. And this rule reflects that. This plan is for this new rule to take effect on Tuesday, May 27th. So I'm bringing this here to facilitate questions or thoughts that you have about these changes and next steps before the rule is finalized.
Since my mic's on, I might as well go unless somebody else wants to go. So I'm supportive of this new proposed distribution rule. I think it's an important change. When we had the discussion last year, and appreciate that the department put together an interim policy to create a placeholder for us to have a policy in place since there wasn't one in the past. So we had something interim in the place, and then we also got through last year. And I think also during that time, we've had some really important infrastructure being built, whether it's more shelter beds, a plan. Also, it's allowed us to, I'm glad this discussion is coming after 3 hours of discussion about some really critical investments we're going to make. I've always felt that tents are not the solution to homelessness. When people are living on the streets without basic services, safety, that we need to do better by them and also by our community. I think this is also an important acknowledgement about the real impacts that unmanaged encampments have on public health, safety, accessibility, livability, and I know we can do better. So I'm very supportive also of the continue to monitor the impacts that it will have on a community. And also, I think it will create additional pressure on us to deliver on the services that we know should be offered and getting people on their path to both shelter and ultimately to housing. So I'm very supportive of this and appreciate it being brought forward at this time.
All right, and we have Stacy here if there are any. Go ahead, please. Commissioner.
I would like to ask that we track the cost differential for staff or for providers to be purchasing. I will again just remind folks that the county started purchasing these out of a request from actually Stacy and I when Stacy was at TPI and I was at Join. Because of the cost of purchasing tarps and tents or tarps and sleeping bags, frankly, in the winter was so much higher for us to buy at a sporting goods store than for the county to purchase in bulk. And we didn't have storage at the providers. So I'm not saying I disagree with this policy shift. I just would like us to track that to make sure that we're not making and we're not decreasing the amount that our providers have for housing placement and other services in order to meet a policy request about tents and tarps. So just ask for that to happen. I know it can be tedious for the providers, but it would be really helpful for us to know the cost over time of this shift. I will also say I agree, Commissioner, tents and tarps have never been a solution to homelessness. Shelter is also not a solution. We know that housing is. And so I think it's really critical that this does come on the tail end of that discussion about the balance system and having the safety on and off the streets, as well as investments in housing and support services that we know actually end people's homelessness every day in this community. So I appreciate the work. I know these are not easy conversations, so I appreciate the work of the staff at the department and with the chair's office to move this policy forward. And I hope this is one of the last times we need to spend a bunch of time on a conversation about tents and tarps.
All right. All right. All right. Thank you all. Thank you so much. This was a lot of material, but we are getting out exactly at noon. So good job, everybody. Any final thoughts before we adjourn for the morning?
Yes, but it's not related to this topic. It's, thank you.
Thank you all for work on the.
I just didn't want to make you sit there and be like, what is she going to bring forward? I wanted to flag for everybody that Commissioner Jones-Dixon and I circulated a a proposed process this morning for further discussion, not this morning, but just like kind of lay it on the table for future discussion about over the next 5 to 6 weeks as we work through all the department budgets and think about what changes we might want to make or propose, and the way to do that in a way that creates a process that is transparent, that gets ideas on the table, and also allows us to tap into sort of expertise from staff. And so I don't know if people have seen it in there. There's a slightly revised version, but just circulating the Commissioner Singleton, you have it in your inbox. Again, it's not a departure significantly from how things have happened in the past, but I think trying to be a little bit more intentional or just share with the public and our broader community and county employees about kind of like the process by which things can come forward. And again, I don't think this is a big departure from the past, although I will. So it's kind of happened organically. So essentially, asking commissioners to bring things forward with where there might be adds or adjustments, and doing that in the public work session so that Christian can sort of capture them. And if there are reductions, coming up with if there's ads coming up with potential revenue streams that match either one-time only or ongoing, and then we'll keep that running list. And I think one thing that is more, I think we want to uplift is that an opportunity to sort of tap the county staff, looking for guidance if we are looking for offsetting budget revenue streams, that we could ask for that more guidance, not them making a recommendation of where we could come up with something, but really being intentional about using staff if we want to. We don't have to, but if we want to, using staff to sort of provide some guidance to make sure that we've correctly matched and that the amounts are correct. Also, just putting on the table, and since this is for a lot of us, kind of a new process, that over the next couple of weeks, the chair also may have new revenue. Unfortunately, it's not going to offset the announcement from the state today, but there is during the process, like last year, I forget how much it was, but there was some new revenue that came in. So just also being intentional about when that comes into the process and how we discuss it. Again, this is just something that Commissioner John Dixon and I thought we'd sort of put out there. And I think from talking to the chair, maybe because I know we all potentially are heading out to the memorial service this afternoon, that maybe Thursday, if people have feedback around the process or additions. Again, it was just something to get the conversation started so we all have common expectations about the process, and staff will know what we might expect of them as well.
You said it perfect.
Okay.
Yeah. Thoughts? Commissioner Moore?
Thank you for this. I am totally supportive, and I appreciate you bringing this forward. I would like to state that, I think we all have areas of expertise or experience. I used to joke that as a lobbyist, there's a lot I didn't know, but I knew a heck of a lot about getting money from the budget. So it's ironic to be in the opposite position, to be trying to be fiscally responsible and conservative and play out scenarios of making sure that our bases are covered. But I really appreciate your proposal around transparency, because I believe in that. I believe that everybody who is tracking our process should know what the puts and takes are. I want to make a comment about two amendments that I put forward, because I have gotten significant blowback from doing that publicly. And I want to say, I don't take any reduction lightly. I care very deeply about staff positions all over this county. This is a very difficult situation. And as somebody who represented public sector workers for 8 years of my life through the Great Recession, was one of the worst times of my life to fight knowing I was going to lose for people's jobs. That was an awful experience. And I have nothing but respect for the employees of Multnomah County. I am so grateful that they choose to use their talents on behalf of this county. And any amendment I bring forward, I will do transparently because I believe in that. But I again reiterate that I am in no way proposing any position increase or decrease based off of the performance of any employee at all. I am overwhelmed by the quality of employees we have at this county. I have stated publicly, and I will continue to state, that my number one priority is services directly to the community. And in that lens, I am looking at positions and programs that are internal facing, not because they are not valuable, they are valuable, but again, my lens is the prioritization of direct services to the public, so I am looking hard. I did send out a series of questions for every department head, because I want them to have the time to look into them and answer them, but I am digging under every rock. So I am very curious about the 500 unfilled positions and why we're carrying them forward. I am wanting to understand redundancies and efficiencies. I did ask questions about DEI staffing. Let me be very clear. I fully support the efforts of Multnomah County when it comes to DEI. I do think that we do not structure our DEI work well, and I would actually like to empower our ODE department to have the ability to direct policy. So that's why I'm asking some of these questions. I am gonna ask about travel. I am gonna ask about supply budgets. I am gonna ask about funds that have been used to sponsor things. That is not to impugn any department's prior use of these resources in any way. I am simply desperate to find funds that can preserve life-saving services that this county does. And so I wanted to address it publicly, make it very clear any proposal I put forward is about tough choices and my priority of direct services. It is absolutely not a reflection of the value of the work being done by whatever I'm offering up. It is simply hard choices and prioritizing services. And I want to get that out there since I feel like there's a lot of conversations happening. That's where I'm coming from. None of this is personal, but I feel like I was elected to do a job. And it is hard to do this kind of work, but I want to do it because I owe that to the people of Multnomah County and because that is what I was elected to do.
So I really appreciate that. And I think your comments kind of reflect the spirit. I'm going to go back to Commissioner Singleton. When we had our retreat, when we first sort of started as a new commission, like if we had disagreements, we were going to attack the policy, not the people. And I think this is the spirit of which we brought this forward, so that it's all on the table and it's not personal. There's no hidden agendas. It's an opportunity for people to sort of put their priorities on the table. And I also think this process where you don't necessarily actually have to, you can like state like, I'd like to do something, say, for example, around the employment piece, without actually bringing forward an amendment, because kind of in a public space, we see like there, is a consensus, we should do that. And so like, how do we do that together? And so I think this is designed to, I think, elevate where there's some, and again, where there's commonalities, it's really important. Also the word that says the commission budget amendments, because this isn't something we're doing to the chair, because the chair is a member of the commission. So it's like, how do we publicly work through? And I think that's, to your point, the expectation of our constituents is that we aren't just like, yeah, we're good with all this, but we really think through what are the impacts on our districts, on county residents, on the things that we want to achieve. And this hopefully will give us an opportunity to do that in a public way. And again, sort of separating out, it's not personal what we're doing, or it's not directed at a person, but really it's, we're trying to get after in a difficult budget environment, like how we best and most effectively utilize our resources.
Thanks. Appreciate this conversation. I just want to reiterate how impactful our proposals on amendments and changes, whatever it ultimately looks like, has on employees. And this conversations about potential layoffs, about folks who are positions that might be being looked at as potential places to get additional revenue from, like all of that has impact on our employees. This topic has already come up in meetings with our unions and with HR when we do layoff, because there's a series of layoff planning meetings. We try to give people as much notice as we possibly can about potential impacts to them, and so that they can be planful. We also have contractual obligations with our unions in terms of notice that we provide ultimately, knowing that the budget isn't finalized until June 12th. But I think that is also something that if we can be really sensitive to that, because, we are making decisions, but as we all know, the impacts to of those decisions impact so many people, both outside and of course inside our organization. So. All right, Chris, I see you're here. I just want to say we need to wrap up so that we can, because a lot of us have to get out to Troutdale. So briefly, please.
I can be brief. Christopher Neal, COO. You've taken most of the words out of my mouth there with concern for the employees. Commissioner Moy, I appreciate the words that you gave earlier. I also want to express my support for this budget amendment or proposal, because I see this table, all of us, as the executive level of the county, therefore being at a more strategic level, a policy level, not the tactical level. And just as you mentioned, Commissioner Brim Edwards, about me understanding and the department's understanding where it is at a strategy level, where it is at a policy level that you all want to get to. I've heard a bunch of them already today, and there's been a few of us that have already been messaging on each other saying, how can we bring this proposal, how can we bring the request from D1, D3 to get to where they want to go at the end state? So we're doing that. We can do that. The departments can do that, and we can all do it together versus at a tactical level where we're trying to figure out where the dots are lining up to get to the end of the yellow brick road. Just start where it is that we want to go, and then we can help you get there. I guarantee it. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. So appreciate this. This is, and I appreciate Commissioner Brim Edwards and Commissioner Jones-Dickson, I can't do numbers right now, for bringing this and the kind of thoughtfulness around this. And, again, I think ultimately, this is a hard budget, cycle. We're going to have to make tough decisions, and the way that we can learn to work together to do that, for the overall good of our county and organization is going to be really important. So thank you. That concludes today's budget work session. The board is going to meet back here just in a few hours, a couple hours, for the Multnomah County Public Service Recognition Week Employee Awards Ceremony. So we're all looking forward to that. And at 6 p.m., we will be back here again to have our first public budget hearing for the FY26 budget right here in the boardroom. So there being no further business, we are adjourned.